the February 13th afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Good afternoon, Carla. Could you please call the roll?
Good afternoon. Fritz.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Udaly.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum.
Welcome to Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order when testifying. Please state your name for the record. Your address will not be necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light will go on, and when your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you. Carla, we have 2 items today, 144 and 145. Could you read them both together, please?
Yes. 144, adopt the recommendations contained within the Rose Lane project report. And 145, approve findings to authorize an exemption to the competitive bidding requirements and authorize the use of the alternative contracting method of progressive design build and authorize a contract for the design and construction of the Rose Lane project, Phase 2, for an amount not to exceed $10 million.
Very good. Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you, Mayor. Today is a very exciting day for my office and for PBOT and for the city of Portland. Since I was assigned PBOT, I've pushed for bold leadership from the Bureau to address transportation's role in our climate crisis. The facts are undeniable. Climate change is here. We are already experiencing its consequences, and it hits our most vulnerable community members the hardest. We know that transportation is a massive contributing factor to the climate crisis. In Multnomah County, 42% of our emissions come from the transportation sector, and these emissions are on the rise. We must reverse this trend if we want to come close to meeting our climate goals and avoiding the devastating impacts on our community. In order to reverse this trend, we need to dramatically reduce the number of combustion engine trips Portlanders take, and fast. By 2030, that's just 10 years away, that means we as a region must make 250,000 fewer trips each day by car than we do today. On average, we need people to drive half as much as they do now. For some of us who live within walking distance of frequent service transit lines, we could accomplish that goal today. We could choose to take transit, walk, bike, or use another transportation option. Others face more challenges and barriers to reducing how much they drive, challenges that become increasingly insurmountable as congestion in our region worsens, housing becomes less affordable, and the wave of displacement continues. We cannot continue to ask people of color, lower-income individuals, and other underserved communities that don't have these transportation options to shoulder the burden of achieving our climate goals. Instead, we need to encourage Portlanders who have options now to make the right choice. Get out of your car and get onto transit whenever possible. And for those in our city who have been displaced, have limited options, and are already experiencing a transit system that is stuck in traffic on a daily basis, we need to make their journeys faster and more reliable in order to provide better access to jobs, services, and opportunities. That's why the Rose Lane project is so exciting. It's an unprecedented vision for our city that will help us take big steps forward toward meeting our climate, equity, and transportation goals. To give you an idea of what we are aiming to achieve, the Rose Lane project will improve trips for more than 100,000 current transit riders on the more than 45 TriMet bus lines and Portland streetcar lines that will benefit from Rose Lane treatments. It will make buses and streetcar trains faster, addressing the over 4,700 hours of combined passenger delay experienced daily in our city. It will increase access to jobs, including making up to 25,000 more jobs available to Portlanders within a 45-minute commute on transit. That's access to 24% more jobs than today on average when measured citywide. It will reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality by encouraging people who can get out of their cars and onto a faster, more reliable transit network. Big action on climate and equity requires big moves. The Rose Lane project is one of those big moves. I'm very proud to bring these items to council for adoption today. So before we move on to our panel, colleagues, I have 2 orders of business to put on record. First, I need to make an amendment to the resolution. You should have each had a copy of this in front of you. After conferring with our internal advisory group, they asked us to make a few edits that clarify what we would be using traditional traffic modeling for to determine the potential treatment for Phase 2 of this project. The concern was that traditional modeling is effective for determining what would happen to traffic at a static moment in time, but isn't as helpful for predicting behavioral changes. Therefore, we are replacing the 6th, be it further resolved with, and please bear with me, it's a little long and technical. Be it further resolved that PBOT staff is directed to take a pilot approach for deploying transit priority improvements through the Rose Lane project, utilize network scale demand modeling to assess potential system impacts prior to pilot project installation, use limited microtraffic simulation modeling analysis on complex locations to primarily help understand potential safety and transit delay conflicts. Primary focus will be to deploy on-the-ground pilot projects to test, monitor, and inform more detailed and refined understanding of transit treatment performance and impacts based on before and after data collection of better off measures and performance metrics. This may lead to modifications to pilot projects to better meet the project goals and objectives.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would
Thank-
you regard this as a technical amendment?
I would.
Could you call the roll, Carla?
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the amendment's adopted.
Thank you. Second, I need to submit the substitute draft of the report. You have the new version in front of you as well. This substitute is mostly intended to correct minor editing oversights and to add acknowledgements, but there are 2 substantive changes based on council feedback that April Bertelsen will explain during her presentation. Can I get a second?
Do we have a second for the
Second.
substitute? We have a
Yeah.
second. Carla, call the roll on the substitute.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the substitute's on the table.
Thank you. And now we will begin. Yay, we've got overflow. Now we will begin our presentation. The first 2 panels are presentations on the project and the companion ordinance for the alternative contracting method. The 3rd panel will be from our TriMet partners. Here to begin the presentations is PBOT Director Chris Warner. Welcome, Director Warner.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the introduction, and thank you for your leadership in this very exciting project. For the record, my name is Chris Warner, and I'm the Director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. On behalf of the Bureau, we're very excited to be here today presenting the Rose Lane Project report and recommendations for adoption. We've been in front of you a couple of times on this project, most recently in July and November of last year. And as you've heard, this is one of our big climate moves under the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge. Thanks to the Climate Challenge support, we've put this work on a fast track because of its tremendous potential to both climate and equity. It will be a real big win for our city. But while we've worked as fast as possible to get to this point, this report is a deep, thoughtful planning, technical analysis, community engagement, and interagency collaboration. We're grateful to everyone who's played a part in getting us to this milestone, and we're also pleased to have members of the community here today to share in this moment. We have two items for your consideration today. First is a resolution to adopt the recommendations contained within the Rose Lane project report, which you have in front of you. Staff from our planning department will speak to the recommendations and how they were developed. And you'll also hear from our partners at TriMet about how our agencies are committed to working together to ensure that these projects reach their full potential. The second item is an ordinance we'll be sharing with you today for a first reading. This ordinance is related to the implementation of the Rose Lane vision and would authorize an alternative, progressive design-build contracting method for the Rose Lane development. This contracting method will allow us to be more nimble and quickly develop and build Phase 2 projects. Staff from PBOT's capital project team and procurement division are here to present that piece for you later today. In 2019, PBOT adopted a new strategic plan for the Bureau. The plan centers on our work on transportation justice, meaning all of our Bureau's efforts are in the pursuit of advancing racial equity and reducing carbon emissions. We also adopted 3 overreaching goals of safety, asset management, and moving people and goods. The Rose Lane project is a perfect example of our strategic plan in action. Doing more to prioritize transit on our streets will significantly improve the ability of our transportation system to move more people through our city more sustainably, reliably, and safely. It's a smart move from our asset management perspective because it prioritizes space on our roadways for the vehicles most able to move large numbers of people. And in partnership with the Commissioner's Office and community stakeholders, we've worked hard to center the project around equity and climate objectives. All sections of PBOT have been working hard and will work on elements of the Rose Lane project. Many hands will make this happen, from our maintenance operation crews installing bus priority lanes and red pavement markings to planners, project managers, engineers, development review, communications, contracting, and on and on. We are also looking at what we can do to improve transit service on our streetcar system. In fact, given the transportation improvements the Rose Lane project will bring, we plan to increase service on the AB streetcar loop to a 12-minute frequency. We wouldn't be proposing a vision this bold if we didn't have proof that transit priority works. We already have transit priority treatments on our streets today, and they are getting results. Last year, PBOT, in partnership with TriMet and Multnomah County, implemented 3 transit priority projects: a bus and bike-only lane on Southwest Madison, a bus and turn lane on Northwest Everett, and a bus-only lane on the Burnside Bridge. These projects address 3 of our biggest transit bottlenecks in our city. 14 transit lines use these corridors, carrying more than 75,000 passengers each day. It's only been a few months, but we've already seen big improvements in bus speed and reliability in those areas, helping smooth out the rider experience along the entire bus route. The Southwest Madison bus lane, implemented in May of 2019, has reduced delay up to 76% during the evening rush hour. The Northwest Everett bus lane, implemented in August of 2019, has reduced delays up to 34% in the evening rush hour. And the Burnside Bridge, which was just implemented in November of last year, is helping buses cross the bridge at least 2 minutes faster. We see these projects as what we're calling early roses, the beginnings of a citywide rollout of transit priority to help create a faster, more reliable transit system across Portland. We are grateful to have TriMet here with us to speak about how we're continuing our partnership to bring these benefits to even more Portlanders, including more frequent bus service. Together, we are making transit better. Just to illustrate the impact that transit priority improvements can have, this is a before and after of the Burnside Bridge. Before we implemented the bus-only lane in November of last year, buses were stuck in traffic with cars and inched along the bridge. Now, as you can see in the picture on the right, buses are whizzing by. And that bus alone can carry the same number of people as all those cars in those 2 lanes. This is really the magic of transit priority. With relatively minor, low-cost interventions, we can free up the workhorses of our transportation system, our buses and our streetcars, free them up from traffic, which delivers a 1-2 punch for climate and equity benefits. First, it vastly improves the experience of those already on the bus today, and we know those are more likely to come from communities of color or from low-income households. And second, it makes transit a more competitive, more attractive option, which is essential if we want to convince more Portlanders to ride the bus or train instead of driving alone. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Duhamel from the Commissioner's Office, who I must say has been kind of our champion and our captain in terms of moving this forward project. So Jamie, thank you for your work, and you can talk about a little about our equity goals.
Thank you, Director Warner. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Jamie Duhamel, and I have the pleasure of working for Commissioner Udaly as her Policy Director and as her liaison to the Transportation Bureau. Back in November, I gave a much lengthier presentation to you about the process we undertook to center racial equity in our project development. Today, I'm going to just give a much more brief explanation of that for those who weren't at the other hearing. Last year, many city employees completed over 60 hours of training from the Office of Equity and Human Rights called Results-Based Accountability for Racial Equity. What it taught us was that we must integrate racial equity into every level of work that we do, even and maybe especially when designing for a new transportation network. We cannot create a better transit system without first considering the needs of the communities that are suffering from the greatest disparities. That is why we created an internal stakeholder group, sometimes referred to as our Transportation Justice Advisors, that consists of people and organizations that represent a wide variety of users, but who also work with a deep equity lens. That group included representatives from Opal Bus Riders Unite, Urban League, Oregon Walks, the Street Trust, the Portland African American Leadership Forum, Portland Bus Lane Project, Portland State University, Unite Oregon, Community Cycling Center, Safe Routes Partnership, Rosewood Initiative, Business for a Better Portland, Verde, and the Sunrise Movement. This informal but esteemed panel helped our office identify the ways in which our traditional traffic modeling and technical approach to transportation infrastructure may inadvertently cause harm to people of color by not considering their specific experiences or needs. We asked this panel to review our approach, our assumptions, and our goals. I took that information back to Commissioner Udaly and PBOT, and we used our learnings to inform not only the draft proposal that went out to the broader public for feedback, but also what we needed to negotiate with TriMet to make Rose Lane a success in achieving our goals. Many of our panel members are here to testify today, but we don't make assumptions about what they are here to say. We worked really hard to hopefully earn their trust and their support for this project, but their voices are their own. This group also helped us identify the better off measures you see on your screen that we used as our guiding North Star to filter the decisions we made in designing the Rose Lane network. Perhaps the most significant measure is how we are addressing commute times. According to data, the average Black commuter spends 20% more time daily commuting to work, which is an additional 50 minutes per week, over 3 hours a month, or 40 hours in a year. The average commuter who is Black spends an entire work week longer sitting in traffic every year. Add to that the growing body of research that finds commute times are the single most important factor that help people out of poverty and into economic opportunity. It became clear that a rapid and reliable public transportation system must be built to achieve better commute times. As April will explain shortly, all of these better off measures that you see will continue to be the primary filter we use to determine what treatments are needed for the best outcomes in Phase 2 as well. Thank you for listening, and now I'm going to turn it over to Kristin Hall.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristin Hall. I'm the planning manager for PBOT, and I'm going to just give you a brief overview of some of the work we've done before I hand it over to our project manager for all of the interesting details. When we first started this project, Commissioner Udaly asked us to really center this work on climate change, or fighting climate change, and centering on racial equity. And that was just a little over a year ago. And so getting to this point that this fast is a huge accomplishment for our team. This project is really aligned with the City of Portland's goals. It's around improving transit service for people of color and low-income households, making more efficient use of our right-of-way, and advancing regional goals to make transit safer or more convenient, accessible, affordable, and frequent for everyone. It also serves our broader PBOT transportation system goals. By 2035, our transportation system plan sets a goal of 1 in 4 commute trips being made by transit. To get there, we need to go from about 12% today, virtually doubling our commute mode split. The Rose Lane project is one step in that direction. We think about why we prioritize transit. It's really about making buses work better for more people. As traffic congestion has worsened in our city, buses, along with the people on those buses, are stuck in traffic. that makes the transit times longer for people who need to use transit to meet their daily needs, and it also makes buses late, so it makes transit less reliable. As these trips take longer and less reliable, people's access to the things they need every day shrinks, effectively making it harder to get where you need to go. We also know that high ridership transit is efficient, equitable, and sustainable. So as we work towards doubling that goal, we want to make transit not just something people do, but something they do because it works for their lives. Do you want to? We are on. When we are on to the video moment. So this isn't just true in theory. A couple of weeks ago, our team went out to observe the morning commute on Southwest Main between 1st and 2nd, where we recently installed a bus priority lane. This video shows what we observed. I thought you were starting. Thank you. It shows what we observed between 8:45 and 9 a.m. We counted the number of people on bikes and cars. Is it going?
I want to wait until you start. Sorry. Because it'll go, but okay.
Yeah.
Talk through it.
Yep. So it shows we've counted the people on bikes and cars, and TriMet provided us with the actual ridership data for the number of buses that pass through the segment on this time and date. So this really shows you how much faster and easier buses move through this area thanks to the bus and turn lane. It also demonstrates the people moving power of buses compared to cars. It took only 6 buses to move the same number of people as 246 cars. Given our congestion challenges, given our limited right-of-way, doing what we can to get more people on buses is a no-brainer for our growing city. So that is a video we've been sharing with community members as a way to illustrate that point and hopefully bring it home. Sorry about that.
Not a sentence you see often.
The internet,
Sorry,
it's so unreliable.
I got very distracted there for a minute. So a really important part of this work and all the work we do at PBOT is being informed by community input. And so Jamie talked about some of the outreach that the Commissioner Udaley's office has undertaken with key transportation justice stakeholders. PBOT also conducted citywide community outreach in early 2020 and late 2019 to help inform the recommendations that are in your report. So we did an online survey. It was taken by over 2,000 residents. So that is respondents, which is a really great rate of response for the things we do. We hosted 3 2-hour in-person open houses around town, and we did presentations to a variety of community organizations. And what did we learn from this? We learned that there's significant support from respondents for the Rose Lane vision and for taking a pilot approach. The support was particularly strong among current transit riders, and more than 2/3 of our survey respondents supported the project. Travel time is not surprisingly, a top determinant of respondents' decision whether to ride transit. So projects that can improve travel time, we think really will influence behavior. Respondents are generally confident that the Rose Lane project will help advance several of the better off measures, and though they said tracking this and reporting on the progress over time is key. Community members do see the need for transit priority across the city, not just in 1 or 2 places or specific neighborhoods. We also heard a desire to identify more opportunities for transit priority in East Portland, which are incorporated in the report you have before you today. A summary of the public engagement is available on our website. Before I hand it to April to get into all of the maps and details, I just want to summarize for you the project recommendations and what we're asking today. We want to adopt a Rose Lane vision and a network of primary Rose Lanes. We want to talk about we want to advance a set of pilot projects for construction in 2020 and 2021. So that is this summer and next summer, which is in our business really quick. We want to partner with TriMet to improve service, and you'll hear a little bit more from TriMet about that today. And really importantly, we want to develop and implement a comprehensive activation strategy to encourage more people to ride transit more often. So for us, it's more than just building the capital project. It's more than just providing the transit service. It's also about helping people connect to that new service and make changes in the way they get around to meet their daily needs. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to April.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, April Bertelsen, Transit Coordinator, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you our...
People are smooth today.
It's true, I feel it. The Rose Lane vision. But I want to step back for a moment and invite you to engage in a process of imagining. Imagine that when you leave this building today at the end of your day, that you don't need to consult the schedule, that you don't worry about if your bus is late or if you just missed it. Imagine that you just walk out and you go and wait a few minutes and you catch the bus. And that you don't worry about if you're going to make your transfer, if you need to take another bus to get to your final destination. Even if that might be if you did miss the bus, it may be a 30-minute wait or longer to wait for the next bus as it's cold and getting dark. Imagine that you don't worry about those things because the bus comes on time, it's more frequent, and it's reliable, and it gets you to your transfers and to your final destination on time, and saves you time to be with your family, your friends, and get things done however you may with your free time. This is what we envision with our Rose Lane network of a vision of lines that are faster and frequent and full for people of Portland and beyond.
Are you going to get to the issue of full in terms of the number of buses that are available?
Yes.
Good. No, I know, but it says Rose Lane's become fuller. I don't think you could get many more people on the 94 bus at rush hour.
Well, not necessarily on that bus, but we also want to see more buses.
Right.
So it is
Okay, I'll
both
wait,
full
sorry.
of people and full of buses. So they increase frequency. Yes. So a bit more about that vision, that they're faster. Both buses and streetcars are not stuck in traffic and come when we expect them with transit priority treatments where they're most needed. That they're more frequent, with buses and streetcars coming every 12 to 15 minutes and more in the peak time. And that they're full of buses and full of people. Sorry. We'd also want to highlight that this is not just about the places where we build those transit priority treatments, that it is about fine-tuning the transit network, and that those benefits extend up and down the line and across to have a citywide benefit. That a transit priority treatment in one part of town helps buses and to be more on time in other parts of town. So that helps people get on the bus on time and make their transfers. And that changes in inner Portland, where buses are stuck in traffic, or often most, benefit riders throughout the city. Again, it's about tuning that transit network. So what is a Rose Lane? I thought it would be good to elaborate a bit more of what we mean. Rose Lanes are corridors where transit priority treatments are used to get buses and streetcars out of traffic. And through the project development process, we will determine which treatments best address the need and context in specific locations. So there is a bit of tailoring involved to the context. Not all Rose Lane corridors will include bus-only lanes. We have a toolbox of treatments, including lanes, but other treatments too, that can be employed in a spot at an intersection or multimodal, improve interactions, stop and station treatments, operational and other treatments such as left turn pockets, signal priority, or other signal improvements. And so we will be looking at our whole toolbox as we look more at these corridors. And to learn more about those tools, you can refer to our report and our Enhanced Transit Toolbox online.
Excuse me, Mayor?
Yes.
Commissioner Harsty.
So are we going to have TriMet next? Is that the plan?
Next panel, yeah.
I believe.
And was there a request that we wait for all the presentations before we ask questions, or am I just
I
assuming
prefer
that
that,
would be so?
yeah. That's always my preference.
Yes, and to clarify, they will be our third panel. We'll have our contracting staff on the ordinance prior to TriMet. So a bit about picking houses. How did we pick where we recommended transit priority improvements and where they're most needed? We focused on locations with the highest transit delay for the most passengers and buses. So we used data in partnership with TriMet and our consultants teams to identify those locations with the highest bus delay, where the more riders are on board, as well as along the line, so high ridership lines, and where there's many buses per hour. And that was our starting point, in addition to looking where do we have other projects in the works and building off of those to add more. We also, that was our starting point, but we also began a technical assessment of the opportunities to apply transit priority, as well as understanding some of the constraints. And this was an additional screening process. Some of the things that we looked at were where there may be a conflict with another project, jurisdiction, where do we have the authority to make those changes, the roadway width, what may fit if we wanted to add a bus lane or queue jump or other tools, and whether or not there was on-street parking or multiple travel lanes that could be reallocated. We also looked for physical constraints in the streets, such as continuous medians or curb extensions that would be a barrier to piloting a project in the near term. And then we consulted with community stakeholders. In the late fall and winter, we, as you heard earlier, engaged many to understand what was most important to them, what was missing, and what were their concerns, as well as how they thought this would benefit. And then that information helped inform our final recommendation we are presenting here today. And so that vision for faster, frequent, and full. It is really out of love for the city and love for the people who live here and move through our city, and a love of transit that I present to you roughly a dozen transit lines on our primary transit network for Rose Lane vision. This map displays those roughly dozen streetcar and bus lines where we are primarily focused on making them faster, frequent, and full. They're not the only lines that benefit from these transit priority treatments, as there's many other lines that travel through the project locations, but these are the primary ones. And this map displays the full line, so that some of those do extend outside the city, and we do see the benefit where we may be making improvements in one part, extending along the whole line. And a bit more about that vision. And part of that, what we mean by frequent and full. Our vision is that the transit arrives more frequently and moves more people, with service increases over time, going to 12-minute frequency or better all day and 10-minute frequency or better in the peak. And you will hear more from TriMet about how they are partnering with us to help realize that. And then this lists those lines that were displayed on the previous map. Meanwhile, I will focus on where we are looking to make transit faster, so the project locations and our implementation strategy for those projects. So we have this next map displays the implementation phasing recommended. Projects be deployed in 2 phases. And that the phase 1, it would be construction mostly in 2020, with about half a dozen in 2021, but 24 projects that we are looking to deploy this year in 2020. And many of these are ones that we've been able to develop or have been in development, are ones that lend themselves to a quick build. The other, so the phase 1 is highlighted in the dark blue, and then in green is highlighted phase 2, which are the locations where we are recommending additional project development this year in 2020 to further scope and define projects to be deployed starting in the following year. And these are ones where many of them are longer corridors or have come with additional complexities that we want to spend time with continuing project development, engaging the community around what our final recommendation will be in these locations. And the specific treatments in these locations will be determined through that process. We do not yet have recommendations on the phase 2 versus the phase 1. We do have project scope recommendations and defined in the
Commissioner
report.
Hardesty.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I got to ask this before I forget. And how does this help us reach our equity goals? If I look at this map, it doesn't actually go with your first principle, which is racial equity in this process.
I will have a bit more about this on the potential benefits later in the presentation, but we do think that, especially in the phase 2, that many of these extend further across the city, and that will help provide benefit to, with an equity lens for people of color and low-income households. And we will continue to monitor to see and help that guide our final recommendations. So the better off measures and the performance metrics we've identified help to guide us along the way as we define. And I think added that even if a project, as I was saying earlier, is in the central city, that can create a benefit that has a ripple effect for someone who doesn't even come downtown, but travels elsewhere through the city. But we will also continue to track to make sure that we can deliver some improvements.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So a pilot. We've talked about a pilot approach, and it's really a 4-step approach that we're recommending, and that would be to deploy some pilots, monitor, and then modify if needed, and before we refine to make a recommendation on a permanent project. And so that tracking along the way and having performance metrics to guide our monitoring and modifications is critical as well. This also aligns with the a recommended amendment that you voted on, that we would do less modeling up front, but more of the monitoring of data during the pilot to get that feedback loop and refine as needed. During both the early planning phase as well as the project development phase, and then during the pilot deployment phase, we will be evaluating both potential benefits and impacts or trade-offs. And we have identified a number of performance metrics that tie to our goals and the better off measures to help us gauge, are we on the right track? And we're looking at, can we reduce bus passenger delay, have transit times, travel time savings and improved reliability, equitable access, such as increased access to jobs, education, healthcare, and daily services. Looking at, does transit travel time, how does it compare to driving an automobile, and are we bringing those closer and more comparable? And increasing transit ridership, and ultimately reducing greenhouse gases and improved air quality. Recognizing that some of the transit priority improvements that could be recommended may come with some trade-offs, that we want to be cognizant of those trade-offs and have those conversations and take in consideration on our recommendations. particularly for those that are impacting the pedestrian environment and safety, but also looking at bike facilities, bike safety and infrastructure. We will also be evaluating impacts to traffic, particularly where it may result in traffic diversion to nearby streets or to the neighborhoods or along streets that are important for walking and biking as well. And also looking at impacts to parking removal. A note on this. When we asked in our survey respondents which had to prioritize these concerns, parking removal was had the lowest score. So of these 4 concerns, parking was a lower, the least of the concerns listed. And now I wanted to touch upon a bit of the funding for the phase 1 versus the phase 2. I think there have been some questions in regards to this. And so for phase 1, which is further detailed in chapter 9 of the report, we have 29 projects identified there. And we are looking to deploy those mostly in 2020 and a small handful in 2021. The funding for those, many of them are coming through committed sources in partnership with our regional partners, including PBOT General Transportation Revenue, our Transit Priority Spot Improvement Program funds, federal funds with the Central City and Motion project, some of which are also Rose Lane projects. System development charges and regional enhanced transit funding and House Bill 2017 funding for transit in partnership with TriMet. The estimated value of the improvements is approximately $7 million for all of the phase 1 projects, and PBOT has it covered. For phase 2, we are still defining these projects, and so we are still developing what the cost estimate will be as well, but we have funding allocated to provide project development in 2020 with targeting construction in 2021. And so we have about $1.4 million proposed in our budget to cover that, and we estimate that the cost to construct is going to be in the $6 to $8 million range. And some potential funding sources for that construction phase, which is unfunded at this time, include PBOT General Transportation Revenue, potentially TriMet House Bill 2017 funding, or other operational savings from Rose Lanes, and Metro Regional Investment Measure. So it's not just about building things. This is about also people riding transit and getting more people on the bus. So we will be including in our efforts a series of activation strategies around encouraging and behavior change to bring more people onto the bus. And increase our ridership. And some of the guiding principles for this activation are to tailor activation to the audience, the needs and priorities and barriers. So understanding why people don't take transit or what their concerns are today, and how can we reach them around those and address them or help encourage overcoming those barriers. As well as advancing equity and climate goals, leveraging partnership opportunities, measuring, and then to measure, track, and evaluate. Some of the potential activation strategies that we're looking at are to demonstration events, free and reduced fare days, encouragement campaigns, rider incentives, and employee partnerships. This photo here we wanted to highlight. This is from Boston, but it is a bus stop that has been decorated with flowers, and so in the spirit of celebrating transit riders,
But it doesn't have anywhere to sit down.
there may be a bench behind that little sign covered with flowers, but noted.
Or at least they have a bus shelter.
It is very pretty.
Another thing I will highlight is this is using a temporary platform, and we are looking to deploy similar in some of our upcoming projects of these modular units. So what benefits could the Rose Lane project help towards? our better off measures. We began in evaluating what the potential outcomes could be for our Rose Lane project. Through that, we have estimated travel time savings for many of the transit lines in the system going through our city. The first and foremost are the Line 20, it's Stark Burnside line, Line 6 along MLK, and the Line 12 starting Sandy and Barber. But it's not just about saving time for transit, it's about saving time for people and getting them to more places. So we also did some analysis of the increased access to jobs for people focused on where they may be, but also at a system level.
Just so I understand the chart,
Yes.
savings from where to where? From one end of the line to the other end of the line, or where?
Yes, this would
Okay,
be
thank you.
at the whole line level, if you followed the whole route and the cumulative benefit of the transit priority treatments that may be along that route.
Okay.
And so where there's more time savings along a line versus a line that maybe goes through one transit priority location, one spot or one small corridor, it may have a smaller benefit. But I think the other thing to highlight about this is that there are many lines, not just the 12 or roughly a dozen that we've identified as a primary network. Other transit lines can benefit too when they pass through these lines, as well as the more reliability as you transfer from line to line. As we know, many people do use more than one line to get to their destination. So this map here it displays how many more places one can potentially reach with a 45-minute transit trip, combining walking and transit, starting from the Portland Community College Southeast campus. So the gray displays where they could get today, and the red expanded area is the additional places they could reach with Rose Lane project. And this could result into up to a 56% more jobs accessible within that 45 minutes. Or if you're you're the campus, 22% more residents can reach you in that 45 minutes. And that's at about 5 p.m. is our estimate. We then repeated this for locations across the city, so doing a system benefit, not just from one place, but from anywhere to anywhere. As Commissioner Udaley had highlighted, we think we can improve access to jobs up to 25,000 more jobs in a 45-minute transit trip. That is a 24% increase in job access citywide. We also wanted to understand this by bringing it down by demographics and ensure that people of color as well as households in poverty could also benefit from these proposed projects. So this is an initial assessment. We would continue to do such assessments through the different phases of the project to help guide where it is most important that we pursue transit priority improvements to help meet our better off measures. So this is the beginning of us estimating. Another thing to highlight about this slide is that we included an analysis of 82nd Avenue. Well, we have understand that many of the state highways, places like 82nd and Powell, Barber, the Burnside Bridge, other bridges, so county and state facilities are important places for transit system as well, and that many people are traveling on those corridors. And while they are not our roads and they're not a part of our phase 1 and 2 projects, they are a part of our larger vision for corridors. And we're looking to continue to work with ODOT, with the county, with TriMet, Metro, and others to improve those locations as well, recognizing that they have an important benefit for people taking transit. And particularly, just this highlights for 82nd that benefit to people of color of adding 82nd is it's greater for people of color than the citywide residents. That it has a 7 to 9% improvement by just adding 82nd Avenue. So we know it's important that we continue to work on these additional locations, while in parallel we also work on our projects on our city streets. And so these next two maps help describe the increased access to jobs in the region that could be reached in a 45-minute by people living in the hexagon areas. So repeating that exercise for the PCC Southeast Campus for across the city. So with the Rose Lane project, these areas that are in darker red are the areas that could have the most increased access to jobs with the potential Rose Lane project. We then, and that the bigger the hexagon, the more people live there, so that added benefit in those locations. This next slide shows that potential with adding in 82nd Avenue. And I will toggle just a bit so you can see how many more areas light up with the deeper red that are more places that people can reach in 45 minutes with the addition of 82nd Avenue. And this, just to, in closing, I think reinforces the importance of us, the work we do and the work we do together with our other regional partners. And with that, and to make things better for Portland and residents beyond. And with that, I can take questions or invite up our next panel of presenters.
When will it be appropriate for us to ask questions about the budget?
Now?
Now? Okay, good, okay. I've got some notes here, having spoken to CBO, and one of the questions they ask is about the long-term cost implications for the project, because it's not entirely clear at this point, and you did cover that in some of your slides, and I appreciated it. So how does the $10 million in the contract on the ordinance relate to the amount of funding that's currently budgeted, which is actually less than $10 million? Where do you make up the difference?
So
10 million.
the 10 million is a cap to allow us to develop projects. Our phase 1 projects are developed and fully funded. Our phase 2 projects, we've identified funding in next year's budget to do project development and design. In that process, we'll figure out how much they cost and how we're going to pay for them. It won't be over $10 million as a total program, but we wanted to leave ourselves room to develop the projects as needed. Our best guess is we're talking more about $6 to $8 million in projects to build in fiscal year 21-22.
Very good. And there's a number of projects, obviously, that are included in the overall package, and it's my assumption that each of those will be budgeted individually?
Yes.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, they come back to council
Yes.
as part of the overall budget process?
Yes, and you can talk, our procurement team will talk a little bit more about how the progressive design build works and how council will interact in that environment.
Okay, and that may help me answer this question. So the Bureau has about $2.75 million in its current budget. And so anything beyond that would come back to council for additional funding authorization?
Sure, it would have to be, Mayor Wheeler, would have to be into the budget document that we put together for the next fiscal year.
Okay, and then you may get to this later, but how do you determine whether to move forward with the overall project after the pilot's completed? What's the metric you're looking at, or set of metrics?
Do you want to answer that?
So our main goal would be that it is improving transit and that we are seeing a transit travel time savings. And I think we have to balance that. And can we also mitigate if there are some additional impacts? So if we could, as long as we are making those improvements towards the metrics that we laid out earlier, that we are making transit faster, that we are indeed better serving Portlanders who take transit, and the refinements that we might want to do to whether that means extending a transit priority treatment or reshaping it or having it reduced or adding mitigation measures such as crossing or traffic calming or diverters, crossings. These are the kinds of things that we may also include in the project or add on. And I think it's we talked about a 3-year pilot time, and that should be time for us to refine and come up with a permanent
Okay,
recommendation.
and you didn't have to listen to my long, boring speech yesterday, but it's going to be a new theme for me, and it's certainly something that I'm requiring of my bureaus, which is I need to know the metrics in advance. I need to know what constitutes success and how we're going to measure it, and have clear understanding of that before we go into the pilot project. And it sounds like you've given this some thought, but I would also encourage in the weeks ahead for you to further refine what specific metrics you're looking at, how you would define success, and how you're going to measure it.
Page 15 of the report lists our pilot approach and monitoring approach. So we propose 3, 6, and 12-month monitoring. That's based on the experience of some of our peer cities doing similar projects. By 3 months, they're seeing whether what the transit's working. By 6 months, they're seeing the ridership changes, and by 12 months, things have stabilized. And so we're proposing looking at bus travel at times. Is it faster and more reliable? Has the project affected travel behavior? So has it changed ridership and mode split? And then at the 12-month point, looking at the travel behavior again, at rider satisfaction, and at overall performance on our transportation system. So looking at how it's affecting the overall flow of cars, trucks, and buses.
Great, and frankly, I'm expecting the results to all be positive on that front. I guess the question for me is before we step up and increase the funding beyond the pilot, I'd like to know how much of an improvement you would like to see in order to justify the additional expenditures.
Yes.
Thanks. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a helpful segue into some of the questions, and I've shared this with you, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I can't remember when we talked. So one of my concerns is the measurements. As I told you when we met in my office, I'm more concerned with who's losing stops. How is that going to impact seniors, people, single moms who are on the bus going to the grocery store in my food desert neighborhood? If the only way to speed it up is to eliminate some stops or to do some additional improvements, right? So I'd like to know what the trade-offs are. I'm more concerned about what happens in neighborhoods like mine with a very limited public transit infrastructure, with almost no bus shelters that shelter people from the rain. I'm very concerned that once again, we're investing resources in an essential city, and we're promised that in phase 2, we'll be looked at again, but we're not even starting on an equal playing field because we're starting so far behind from where the core central city's transit structure is. So I'm very concerned that we say the focus is racial equity, but nothing in what I've seen and talked about so far leads me to believe that we're prioritizing those who are transit dependent and those who have no other choice. It sounds like what the focus has been is on people who have many options, and you're trying to make the buses more attractive. I also haven't heard anything about whether we're using clean buses in places with high levels of air pollutant and how TriMet is investing those resources in the communities that need it most. And so just like putting my stake in the ground, let you know those are some of my big questions and probably won't get them all answered today. But I appreciate that there are some folks that are looking at vehicles. I'm all about the people. and what people are going to be penalized because we're helping people get to the suburbs faster?
So I want to just touch on a couple of your questions and recognize that all of those are the kinds of things we'll be considering as we do project development. But on stop consolidation is one tool for speeding transit. It is certainly not the primary or only tool we're looking at with this project. And the other points, we would look forward to coming back and talking with you about those as we get into the project management
I
development.
guess I'm just concerned if we invest in a central city and then the economy takes a downturn, then once again, East Portland's going to be told, oh, sorry, we just don't have money to do phase 2, right? And because we have such a limited infrastructure starting with, I'm just very concerned. I guess I would not call this a racial justice initiative if we're not prioritizing the people who are most transit dependent.
So I'd like to jump in here. 'Cause
Commissioner
I don't.
Hardesty.
The
Commissioner
responses need to be a little stronger.
Have we met?
First of all, in order to identify these first projects in Phase 1, we looked closely throughout the entire city at where the transit bottlenecks are and where the highest ridership was to determine the priority lines. I mean, we've said this over and over again. If you're waiting for a late bus in East Portland, it's probably because it got stuck downtown. So you cannot look at that map and say because there's a concentration in the central city that we are not serving people in East Portland. That is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the approach that we are taking. The congestion is happening in the central city. We are also looking very carefully at the bottlenecks and what's causing them so that we can lay down the best intervention. I want to say right now, when you look at those red lines, I think it's confusing people. We are not painting lanes red from the river out to 162nd Avenue. We're doing priority signals, we're doing queue jumps, and we're doing the bus-only lanes where they're needed. So we are absolutely serving people in East Portland in Phase 1. What we cannot do, because it's outside our power since we don't own our transit agency, is to add new lines, which is what I think you're getting to. East Portland needs more lines, expanded service, not just increased service. But the goal of Rose Lanes is to use our existing system in a smarter, more efficient way so that, as I mentioned, those people, roughly 50% of Portlanders that live within walking distance of high-frequency transit have faster, more reliable transit. It is literally Phase 1, and it is an ongoing conversation with TriMet. I know I didn't answer all of your questions, Commissioner, because there was a lot packed in there.
Well, thank you, I appreciate
yeah.
that. But I think the point is today, if I stood on a bus stop in Central City and I stood on a bus stop in East Portland, the bus stops are as different as night and day. And so to somehow say that this is equitable service because we both get to ride the bus, right? I'm standing in the rain. The people in Central City are not standing in the rain. I have the butt cheek lanes. The people in Central City don't have those, right? So we're not starting from a place of equality. We're starting from an unequal place, and then we're somehow saying, but everybody will benefit.
So Rose
Not buying it.
Lanes are a PBOT project. PBOT owns the lanes. TriMet owns the shelters. Shelters are a legitimate conversation that we need to have, but for the purposes of Rose Lane, which is getting buses and streetcar trains unstuck from traffic, that they were not our primary concern. And I would argue that with faster, more reliable, more frequent buses, the rain becomes less of a problem because you're not standing in it as long. Well, I navigate the city with a kid in a wheelchair, and it's particularly tough to stand in the rain with him waiting for buses that don't always provide reliable service for people with disabilities. So I'm well aware of the limitations of the system and some of the needs that aren't being met. But we can't fix all of the inequities that exist in our transportation system with one pilot project through PBOT. We don't own all of the pieces. And as far as the clean bus question, that's another thing that we don't have control over. TriMet is initiating a process of electrifying their fleet with zero support at the federal level, and with buses that simply can't serve a lot of the existing routes because the routes are too long or there's too many hills. So again, another really important conversation to have, not something that we can address in the first phase.
I'm just
of
hoping
this.
that as we negotiate, that we're investing money to speed up TriMet's transportation system. Now, if we're going to make the decision to do that, we should be expecting that TriMet is also going to make some investments in places where they have lacked investing. I don't want to spend $8 million of city money and only have promises from TriMet that they're going to try to do better in phase 2. To me, that is not an acceptable outcome of this pilot. Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to our other panel on the alternative contracting method in our ordinance recommendation. So Caitlin Reff, PBOT Capital Project Manager, and I do believe we have Kathleen. Yes.
Great, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Welcome, thank you.
Okay, hi, my name is.
Yeah, it's on. It's
No,
good.
you need to press that button. You need to press the button. It's not on.
Oh, it's
Someone
not on.
turned it off. They turned
Carla's
it off.
Okay.
telling me it's not on.
now I've got a green light. Okay,
Just
thank
leave the
you.
mics on. When you come up, just leave them on. Thanks.
Just as a rule, listen to what Carla says, not me.
We do.
Don't look there.
That's the way it works.
My name is Caitlin Reff, and I'm Major Projects and Partnerships Project Manager at the Bureau of Transportation. I am here to talk about the second item of business on this agenda item, the ordinance that's before you, and it is to approve the findings and authorize the use of an alternative contracting method for Phase 2 of the Rose Lane project. And really what that means is instead of our standard low bid or design build approach, we are here recommending a progressive design build method for Phase 2 of the Rose Lane project. We've been working in partnership with procurement and contracting specialists, both of who are with me today, and they're going to share a lot more detail on this, but really to define what the unique Rose Lane Phase 2 project development and implementation needs are, and identify a contracting method that can holistically support the city's goals that you've just heard presented and ensure that we're working to meet those. So why alternative contracting? Rose Lane Phase 2 projects do have a significant role to play in meeting Portland's climate and equity goals, as well as advancing local and regional plans and goals to make transit more convenient, accessible, affordable, and frequent for everyone. Phase 2 includes projects that require significant additional project development and design, but do have a fast-track delivery and construction plan for as soon as next year. So the Phase 2 projects that have been identified in concept and in the Rose Lane report are considered on many of the longer corridors where more significant scoping is required, additional engagement with community stakeholders, and with design, development, and construction costing progressing concurrently. These tasks really do require specialized skills and expertise, and the schedule requires a collaborative design-build team approach. Commissioner Udaly and her staff have encouraged PBOT to think creatively about Rose Lane, the project and its implementation, so that we can advance this important work that is centered on addressing disparities in our transportation system and improving the lives of Portlanders through the better off measures that have been identified. So with that in mind, and in partnership with procurement, we are recommending a progressive design build contracting method, and I will hand it over to Kathleen to share a little bit more about what that means.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I'm Kathleen Brenes-Marua, Procurement Manager over Design and Construction Services, and I am here to recommend that you authorize the exemption from the competitive low bid procurement requirement and allow us to pursue the alternative contracting method of progressive design build. This will allow us to issue a request for proposals solicitation to enter into the contract, select a design builder based on their qualifications and commitment to the project goals. In order to exempt us or exempt this project from the low bid, you as the local contract review board have the authority when findings are made that support the alternative approach. The findings were included in the ordinance, and they are before you. They address the technical complexity of the project, the specialized expertise that's required, market conditions, public benefits, and other factors, compelling factors for using this method. And these findings were made available for public comment, and no comment were received. The progressive design build method, again, is a qualifications-driven contracting process that resolves in a single contract with a single entity for the project design and construction. It fosters a collaborative environment where the city has significant control, and the design build team focuses on project team goals and not their individual success. The progressive design build method will allow us to have the construction contractor involved in the design process and in value engineering throughout to ensure cost containment. The initial contract covers the preliminary design development and establishment of a guaranteed maximum price for the construction of the project. To address one of the questions that you had earlier, once that guaranteed maximum price is negotiated and finalized, we will come back before you to seek authorization to then accept the guaranteed maximum price and be able to enter into a construction services contract to then construct the project.
Great, thank you.
An additional benefit of alternative contracting is that it does enable us to provide for greater opportunities to subcontractors certified with the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, and to diversify the workforce. Given the collaborative approach during the project development, we're going to be able to negotiate that with the design builder and participate in specific outreach approaches once the contract is awarded. I asked Carrie to join us, and she can tell us a little bit more of her approaches with the design builder to achieve greater utilization.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Carrie Waters. I serve as Contract Equity Coordinator with PBOT, and I have to underscore the benefits of the flexibility of this model for firms certified through COVID. It offers greater opportunity to consider their qualifications and corporate responsibility beyond cost alone. And as I hope you are aware, the low bid model is cost prohibitive for those firms that have historically experienced exclusion from the economic benefit of our contracting opportunities, and it promotes genuine partnerships between the prime selected and the subcontractors to slice and dice scopes and creative ways to increase participation from our co-bid certified firms. PBOT's strategic imperative of transportation justice and our recently adopted strategic plan reaches beyond the types of projects that we do, but in how we accomplish excellence in our project delivery by leveraging these opportunities for community wealth building and retention. Over the past year, we have built a contract equity program framework and are now initiating rollout of engagement out to our prime contractors, now at a larger scale, in order to better understand their engagement approaches and to offer strategic expertise so that we can better understand, better achieve and exceed our current goals. So I am excited to avail myself to provide support in that realm for this project through information sharing and facilitation of genuine relationship building between the prime selected and our diverse business community.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
That concludes this panel, and next we have TriMet to invite up, unless you had any questions.
No, that was a great presentation. I appreciate your answering my question. Thank you. It's very good.
Thank you. And next I'll be inviting up our TriMet partners, Bernie Bottomley, Board Member Director Lori Bonham, and Jamie Snook.
Great. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, Bernie Bottomley, representing TriMet. It's good to be here. We're here to celebrate and to thank you for your leadership and effort on behalf of the transit riders of the community. I want to introduce Lori Bauman, who's on our board. Our general manager, Doug Kelsey, sends his regrets. He is in rural British Columbia visiting with his granddaughter, who is experiencing some significant health issues at the moment. So he sends his apologies. But for that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed board member.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Lori Bauman. I'm a member of the TriMet Board of Directors, District 4, which includes Southeast Portland. I want to first thank Commissioner Udaly for your leadership in prioritizing transit. And I want to thank also Mayor Wheeler and the rest of the commission, and the City Council, for supporting steps that will mean real improvements in transit. I last came before you in 2018 when I testified in support of the Division Transit Project. At that time, I told you about my twin daughters. They are young adults who experience developmental disabilities. They both ride TriMet just about every day to go to work, to see friends, and to get out in the community. For people like them who experience disabilities, transit means independence and self-reliance. I can tell you that faster and more reliable transit, and bus travel in particular, will have a real impact on my daughter's ability to reach their full potential as engaged and self-supporting citizens. So if we give priority to transit on city streets, we will impact the livelihoods of so many people like my daughters. If buses are faster and more reliable, people will be able to get to work on time and get home more quickly. People who rely on transit on a daily basis will see real value from the Rose Lane project. Others will see how fast and easy it is to use transit to get around, and they'll start taking the bus. This is a great way to reduce single occupancy vehicle use, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and move to a more sustainable city. At TriMet, and on behalf of the Board of Directors, we really appreciate the partnership that we have with Commissioner Udaly and with the city, and we look forward to continuing and strengthening the partnership and to collaborating to improve transit and improve the lives of our customers. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Hardesty, Jamie Snook, who is our manager of capital projects, and I are going to tag team our presentation. So I just want to start by saying that as somebody who's been in Portland my whole life and been in and around the transportation world for most of that time, I think this is a seminal moment for the city and harkens back to the partnership between the city and TriMet that we've had since the early 70s. And I think back to, one of the innovations that really the rest of the country looked to in that era of the building of the transit mall, one of the first transit malls in the country. Building of the light rail system, one of the first light rail systems in the country, the first modern streetcar in North America, and now the Division Transit Project and the Rose Lane Initiative. Those are the kinds of things that other cities look to us as leaders on and as innovators and as pioneers. And I'm really proud of the city and of your work on this, Commissioner Udaly in particular, for your leadership. So I'm very proud to be here, just from a personal basis as well as a TriMet representative. Before I get into detail, I wanted to also acknowledge April Bertelsen and Kristen Leonard have done a tremendous amount of work with us. Jamie Duhamel from Commissioner Udaly's office, Gabe Graff and Timur Ender, who've also been working on the ETC, the Enhanced Transit Projects, which were kind of the harbingers of this Rose Lane initiative. All of them have been tremendous people to work with and have represented the city very well. Commissioner Udaly mentioned the climate crisis. I think we all know that we face that. The mayor and our general manager recently announced a number of initiatives that we're jointly taking to begin to address that from the standpoint of how we operate. Changing the way that the transportation system works is fundamental to our ability to respond to that crisis. The largest sector of the economy that we have not addressed in the carbon emissions world is the transportation sector. And the way that we can address that is by improving transit and moving people from single occupant vehicles into buses, and then converting those buses to non-diesel platforms, both of which we're endeavoring to do. I want to just acknowledge that, like the city, our strategy, our goal for this is to make the system fast, frequent, and full. Commissioner Fritz's question about full, we'll get to in a minute. I think we can respond to that and a number of other questions that were raised earlier. We want the system to be full, but not overfull. And we want there to be capacity for everybody who needs to get on to be able to get on. We recognize that the commitment that the city is making in this effort is a significant one, and TriMet needs to respond in kind. And we need to increase the commitment that we're making to the lines that are served by these improvements, and we're prepared to do that. I want to just...
next slide?
Yeah, next slide, if you could.
Carla's gone, so...
Sorry.
Carla's not there, so you have to wait for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so do you have, is it another slide or?
No, she's just got to advance it.
There we go. We can't function without Carla.
Sorry. So one slide back from that. One of the questions or the issues that was raised earlier was about, even though the geographic location of these improvements is in the central city, do they benefit people in other parts of the city? And I think that the answer to that is absolutely yes. On this slide, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but there are 3 little black rectangles there in the central city. Those represent the 3 enhanced transit projects, Central City in Motion projects that have been implemented so far. And the green lines represent the bus lines that use those facilities. And you can see that they serve huge areas of the region, and particularly those East Portland areas that we're trying to improve service in. The time savings that is realized by that improvement in downtown Portland is incredibly important to those customers that are farthest out on the line, because a small disruption in the schedule downtown cascades as the line gets longer, and you get farther and farther away from the scheduled time that we publish and that the customer is expecting to experience. So those changes downtown not only speed up the system, but they make the system much more reliable, because that's where the majority of the uncertainty in the schedule comes, because there are intersections there where sometimes you wait for 10 seconds, sometimes you wait for 10 minutes, and we don't know from day to day what the delay is going to be. With the Rose Lane initiatives, the amount of time that we spend in those intersections is much more predictable, and that is a key improvement for those folks that are farthest out on the line, as well as the travel time savings. I also want to mention that the routes that are served by the Rose Lane changes are the routes that we have targeted for improvement, because they serve areas of the region that have higher concentrations of low-income and minority residents in them. So these are the lines that we want to improve and add service to, because they do connect to those communities. Particularly, and I think the presentation earlier about the travel time to get to work is important, because we know from our research that the travel time for those folks who have been essentially gentrified out of the central city and moved to Mid-County and East Portland because of the affordable housing dynamic, are at a disadvantage when the travel time is longer. They can't access as many jobs. That reduces their opportunities. It reduces their earning power. And these improvements significantly help those folks in accessing more employment areas. So with that, I am going to just mention that we would love to see this process move forward. There are, of course, 82nd Avenue and other opportunities which the City of Portland doesn't necessarily own. So we're also looking for opportunities to work with other jurisdictions who own those right-of-ways to make similar improvements that serve the residents of Portland. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, and she's going to walk through some of the service expansions that we're anticipating.
Thank you. Thanks. And since I'm just getting to speak now, I want to offer my thanks as well. So it's been a real pleasure working with PBOT on the Central City Motion and the Enhanced Transit and the Rose Lane. And it's just been a wonderful partnership, and I'm very excited and happy to be here. So I got to say my thank yous. Now I'm going to jump into the presentation. So I'm going to step a little bit backwards and just talk a little bit about the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. This was established through the HB 2017, and we worked through with our HB 2017 Transit Advisory Committee to develop a plan on how we were going to increase service. And so this map is really showing where it is that we were planning on increasing service to begin with. And we're looking at, new lines and route extensions, service upgrades, looking at the reallocation of the Line 2, where the reallocation of hours would go when Division Transit Project comes into fruition. And really looking at this map, we can see that there's a lot of service upgrades in East Portland, and we're really excited to make those things happen. And the plan shows, as I mentioned, that the Line 2 reallocation of hours really going into East County and connecting to jobs around the Columbia Corridor and within East County. I also want to mention on the map that the light gray areas are our equity focus areas, and really emphasizing that that's where we're putting most of these service improvements. I also want to emphasize that we've been doing a lot of work since HB 2017 passed and working with the Transit Advisory Committee. And the next slide is really showing where we've been advancing those. So the yellow line is showing where we've already started the improvements, and those are completed. The dark blue are looking at improvements that are going to be happening in March of 2020. So this spring, we'll be additionally putting in more service on our transit network. And then the blue is the proposed improvements for fiscal year 21. So we're really excited to be moving all of these service improvements forward.
Commissioner Hardesty has a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Can you tell me what you mean when you say service improvements? What does that look like for the user?
So if you look along the right-hand side of that slide, you'll see the list of improvements. So 5 new bus lines, 3 lines with improved weekend services, 7 route extensions. That means the route is going farther than it used to go.
And which of these are in 2020 and which are proposed? So I'm assuming if it's in 2020, it's already been approved. And if it's in 2021, it has not, there's no financial commitment to it?
No, Commissioner Hardesty, after the passage of House Bill 2017, we initiated a significant community outreach effort where we brought in a 29-member committee of citizens to help us do a couple of things. One is to define the equity areas that they wanted us to focus on, so that's the gray areas that Jamie mentioned. And the other was to determine how they wanted us to allocate these new resources, what the balance between capital, bus stops and shelters, those kinds of things, and service improvements they wanted to see. So the service improvements you see here are the result of that exercise. They developed a 5-year plan as part of that process, assuming that nothing dramatic happens with House Bill 2017 resources. And there are some threats to that resource that are happening right now that I'll talk about in a second. But assuming that that moves forward with the projected revenues, these are as close to guaranteed as you can. They're in our plan, and we have anticipated revenues to come in to fund them.
Thank you.
So shifting now just a little bit to the amenities side of the equation. So we had these public open houses and workshops, and they identified a number of capital improvements that they would like to see on the transit system. One of them was better customer information, so that instead of just in downtown having reader boards that tell you when the bus is coming, that those are available in other areas of the city. So we have a goal of spending the resources they allocated out of House Bill 2017 on digital information displays at all transit centers, not just those in downtown, and at all large transfer points in the system. So that's not we have 9,000 stops in the system, so we're not talking about electronic reader boards at all of those, but at the 50 or so major stops along the system. And if you, Jamie's map, where you see two lines intersect, north-south and east-west, that's those kind of locations. So that's our goal, and we're starting on that now, and we're experimenting with some new technologies, electronic paper, which I don't know anything about, but it's supposed to be the new thing. And then there was a question earlier about bus shelters. One of the things we heard in the workshops was the desire for additional shelters, particularly in East Portland, and we are following up on that. We have 35 additional shelters that we essentially have the funding for. Now we're trying to find the locations for them. And one of the challenges that we have in putting shelters out, particularly in East County, is that for a shelter to fit on the sidewalk has to be pretty wide. And in East Portland, as we all know, sometimes there aren't even sidewalks, and in most cases, the sidewalks are fairly narrow. And unless we can find a right-of-way behind the sidewalk to build a little pad that the shelter can sit on, we can't actually put the shelter on the sidewalk, because then we violate the ADA requirements of clearance. So the challenge that we're working on is to identify those places where there's a need for a shelter and we have right-of-way, or working in the partnership with PBOT to identify those places where we'd like to have a shelter, but we need to acquire the right-of-way or get the landowner to agree to let us use a small area of their property. And I will say it's a difficult proposition to get property owners to agree to allow us to put a shelter on their property. Some of them are very generous and willing to do that, but most, it's a tough conversation with them. So we're working on it, but I just want you to be aware of the challenges. The next map slide shows you where our current new bus shelters that we've identified locations for are. And so those will be going in the next year and a half, the next two construction summers. There are more to come, but again, those are not, we haven't identified the properties where we can locate all the rest of the shelters. Again, these are targeted for the areas that the House Bill 2017 committee identified as the equity areas that they want us to focus on. A lot of those are in East Portland.
And are these in addition to the 35 shelters you just
The 35
previously?
include these, yeah.
They're included,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So 35 in the city proper, and then these are the ones system-wide?
35 is system-wide, but most of them are in the city of Portland, yeah. And then I think there was also a question about, how do we deploy buses? How do we deploy services? Are we making sure that those are being deployed in a way that is fair and equitable? And so one of the things that we're required to do under federal law is conduct what's called a Title VI of the Civil Rights Act analysis, and we've incorporated that into our business plan. And this slide just shows you the things that we look at through an equity lens. We look at the revenue hours, so we look to see, are we providing and I I don't want to get too technical. The standard for what constitutes a low-income and minority area is slightly different for this measure than for House Bill 2016 or 2017 because it's the federal standard instead of the standard our advisory committee set up. So, but the measure is, are those low-income and minority areas getting equal or better service than the population as a whole? And so we look at the number of hours of service we provide, whether there's crowding on the system, so whether crowding in low-income and minority areas is greater than in the rest of the system, on-time performance, whether there's service at all. And then we look at the age of the vehicles to make sure that the vehicle age for low-income minority services are younger than or equal to the age of the buses on the rest of the fleet. And we look at seating, lighting, elevators, digital displays, shelters, signs, and waste baskets. And we're in compliance on all of those. So all of those factors, we provide service that's equal to or better than the average in areas that have higher proportions of minority and low-income residents than the rest of the region.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. And can you say that because it's based on the service we have rather than the service we lack?
Yes. So it's not based on what we wish we could provide to the region. It's based on the services that are currently out there. So for example, our fleet, the average age of our bus fleet is 8 years about. We wish the average age of our bus fleet was 7 years, but it's 8 years because that's the money we have. So we measure whether low-income and minority routes have buses that are older than 8 years, not older than 7 years, which is what we would love to have. So it's based on what's there today, not on what we wish was there.
Isn't that an unequal measurement?
How do you mean?
Well, because if you're measuring, does Northwest get the same level of service that East Portland gets? Well, Northwest probably has twice as many bus lines, certainly many more transportation options, and then you have a community that has very limited transportation options, but you're measuring them the same.
Well, we're measuring the average of all residents in the region and their access to transit. So yes, there's an inequity in that downtown Portland, let's say, if you live in downtown Portland, the number of hours of service that are near you is thousands of hours. And if you live in outer East Portland, the hours of service are, in the tens or, but we can't, there's no way to, equilibrate those. What we do is we look at, and what Title VI requires us to do, is to look at the average for the region. So we take all the residents of the region and all the hours of service in the region, we average those.
So then you won't really be identifying communities of color that need additional resources, because if you're taking a regional approach, then those numbers are very skewed.
Well, I understand what you're saying. It doesn't prevent us from trying to do more, and that is what we're doing. We're targeting all of the improvements that we're making in the system over the next 5 years to those areas in the map that I mentioned earlier. So the federal requirement is a minimum, not a maximum, and we're trying for a lot better than the federal minimum. Does that? Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jamie, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Rose Lane routes themselves.
Yes, thank you.
Can I, not to be rude, can I get a time check? Because we've got quite a few people signed up, and I want to make sure we actually hear from the public before we have to adjourn.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry?
3 minutes.
Perfect, great, thank you.
And then I have a couple questions.
So, thank you again. So we have been working with PBOT staff and Commissioner Udaley's office to really look at how we can then support Rose Lanes and increase service. And so what you see on this map is we are looking to prioritize the Phase 1 improvements and increasing service along those Phase 1 lines, moving them to 12-minute weekday frequencies and 10-minute peak headway frequencies. So really premium service on those lines that are showing where they're prioritizing transit, and we're willing to move ahead with prioritizing transit as well. Some of these were already slated for improvements. For example, the 6 is going to 12-minute frequencies in spring of 2021, sorry. Is that right?
Yeah, you're.
Sorry, I had these memorized and then I lost it. The line 6 is looking to go to 12-minute frequency in September of 2020. And the line 12 is looking to go to 12-minute frequencies in March of 21. So we're already going in that direction. So for phase 1, we're looking at additional frequencies on the line 20 and the line 14. So we are proposing that we'll be able to introduce these frequencies on those lines in fiscal year 21-22. So we're really working with PBOT and the Commissioner's Office to make sure that we can prioritize transit on those lines as well. So if you go to the next map, this is showing the phase 2 improvements, also bringing those lines up to that premium transit service headways. And we're proposing that we could have phase 1 and phase 2 implementation by fiscal year 23-24. So we're working really hard to try and push as hard as we can to move those frequencies as fast as we can to match the investments that the city's making on the street to prioritize transit. So I breezed through that really quickly. I think that's like the meat and the heart of everything that we wanted to say, and I said it in 30 seconds. But I think that what we're really trying to say is that we are really appreciative of the hard work that you all are doing to prioritize transit, and we want to match our service investments to the work that you're doing. And we're proposing that to meet those headways as fast as we can.
And I've just asked staff to hand out to you a letter from our general manager, and appended to that is a table which shows you line by line when we would expect to get to that high level of service, basically our premium level of 12-minute base all-day service plus 10 minutes in the peak hour. And for all of these lines, for the section of the line that, for the Rose Lane sections themselves, there'll be a bus every 7 minutes on those sections, because some of those sections have multiple bus lines. So there'll be very, very frequent use of the red line, or the Rose Lanes, and very frequent bus service as well. If I may just quickly go back to a couple of questions that were raised earlier that.
Yes, and then Commissioner Fritz has a couple of questions as well.
So one question was about stop consolidation, and we don't anticipate any stop consolidation as part of the Rose Lane initiative. All of the changes that we're proposing are really about increasing frequency and speeding bus travel with the existing stop structure. There are potential opportunities with the Rose Lane initiative to pilot some commuter or what we call skip stop type of buses. We wouldn't eliminate the local, the bus that stops at every stop, but we might implement buses that are intended to get people longer distances into downtown, for example, so they don't stop at every stop. The Rose Lane allows us to do that more efficiently because the express isn't getting caught in the same traffic as the local is. So that's one. And then the other issue that came up was about electric buses and how we plan to deploy those so that they benefit equity communities. We have, the TriMet board has adopted a battery electric bus plan, and it calls for deploying the battery electric buses based on the equity considerations of the line that serves that area. So the first battery electric lines would go into areas that have low income, higher proportions of low income and minority populations. The one footnote on that is that right now we have to, the battery electric buses don't travel as far as we would like them to. And so I don't want to make a blanket statement that the first battery electric bus is going to go on route that serves a low-income and minority route, it has to be both a low-income and minority route, and it has to be short enough that the battery electric bus can effectively serve it. We don't want to put battery electric buses out and have them breaking down on those routes that serve low-income and minority communities.
How many hours do they run?
Well, it's not so much hours as miles, and so it's 75 miles right now is kind of where the industry is at, and we have a number of routes that come in at under 75 miles, so we have some places that we can deploy them. Once you get past the first 3 or 4 routes, they start to get up to 100, 150 miles per day, and that's where we just are waiting for the technology to catch up with how our system works. But our intention is to get them out, and we're rebuilding our Powell garage on the east side to be our battery electric bus base. And the reason we did that was because that base has most of the lines that serve low-income and minority communities, particularly in East Portland. So we can have the base serve that community. And then to Commissioner Fritz's question about capacity, we are looking at, TriMet is the largest transit district in North America that does not have articulated 60-foot buses. And the reason for that goes back to the 1970s when we had articulated buses and they were a disaster. Now that all the mechanics...
What is that you're talking about?
Articulated
bus?
Articulated bus, a normal bus is 40 feet long, an articulated bus is 60 feet. Same driver, same route, but you get about a third more passengers on board.
And they bend somewhere in the middle, like a bendy straw. They bend somewhere
Yeah,
in the
that's
middle.
what they're articulated, right, yeah. They're kind of like a streetcar with a bend in it, yeah.
The trains go that way.
Yeah, exactly. So we are very interested in bringing articulated buses back to Portland because all the mechanics that worked on those in the 70s have retired. So
they're not going to set them on fire.
they're not going to go running for the hills.
Yeah.
The challenge that we face there is that right now, the bus manufacturers don't make articulated battery buses that can travel far enough to serve our needs. So we're kind of waiting and hoping that the industry catches up. There are some prototypes out there. We're also piloting a new way of getting articulated buses, which is taking old articulated buses and stripping them down and recycling them, essentially, taking the old steel and metal chassis and reconstructing it as a battery electric bus. And we hope to have our first of those, first in North America, here this coming summer. And if those are successful, we think, and they cost about a third less than a new one. So we're really hoping we can accelerate the technology if that works out.
Well, thank you for answering my question, if I may.
Please, Commissioner Fritz.
There are a number of the buses that I ride that have corners that I don't think an articulated bus could get around. I'm always astonished that the 40-foot ones can.
Yeah.
So and frankly, I'd rather have more frequent, smaller buses than have to wait for the 12 minutes, 15 minutes. Sure. I mean, it might help on some of the straighter routes and on some of the peak hours, but and I would say that even a 12-minute headway is not sufficient.
During the peak, certainly it's not. So to answer your question, yes, we are, as part of this initiative, we are adding peak hour service. That's one of our commitments, is that there will be, and we say 10-minute, but in many of those cases, that's a minimum. In many cases, they're actually more frequent than 10 minutes on some of those key routes.
I think that's absolutely essential because you can get people on the bus and you can get them places fast, but if they're standing up the entire way and packed like sardines, they're not going to do it anymore if they can get away with it.
Just one other little quick thing on the articulated buses, they actually have a tighter turning radius than a regular 40-foot bus. The wheelbase on an articulated bus is shorter than on a 40-foot bus. So they actually do really well in tight spaces.
I'd still rather have smaller ones more often, or at least more often, I think, is the key. April was saying about Imagine. On Monday, I'm going to be in England where we've had 5-minute bus service for my entire life. And you never look at, you don't have as many reader boards because you don't have to worry about it. There's another one coming along. Yeah. So it can be done, and we should be doing it. Thank you very much. Somebody used the word reallocation of resources. Are there any bus lines that are going to get less service because of this project?
No, absolutely not. Jamie was mentioning that when the Division Transit project goes into place, we've made a commitment that the hours that are currently on the number 2 bus that Division Transit project will replace, that those stay in East Portland. So we will take those hours. Essentially what we're doing is we're adding significant new hours to the Division corridor and to the routes that connect to Division north and south. Rather than taking those hours and reallocating them around the region, they're staying in East Portland. So that's what we mean by reallocation.
And then my final question is actually I have 2 final questions, sorry, but I haven't asked any before now. When is the Barber Light Rail supposed to be finished?
Well, if all goes well, a mere decade from now, we'll open that up.
Okay, so I noticed that Barber was slated with the yellow of the light rail and really nothing in any of the other phases. Is there any possibility of having some enhanced service on Barber while we're waiting for light rail?
Sure. I mean, that's one of the, we look at that as part of our normal review. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. As you're doing that, I really like the express buses, and I would suggest that if you were to make them express beyond the city limits, particularly the Sherwood one, while you've still got to get to Sherwood, all you've got is the 94, right? They're out of luck when the 12.
Yeah.
But in order to be able, then they'll be able to turn around and come back faster as well.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to look at that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank
Mayor?
you. Commissioner Udaly, I apologize, thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your partnership. We literally couldn't do this without you. And we are striving toward our shared goals and values around increasing ridership and decreasing carbon emissions. With that said, I do have to admit that I had hoped for a greater commitment to increase service to run simultaneously with the Rose Lanes. My concern is that if we don't meaningfully increase capacity on these lines, that we will not maximize their potential. We will have diminished outcomes in this pilot that may dampen the public's enthusiasm and not get us to our ridership goals as quickly as possible. Because we say 25% by when? 2030?
2035.
My goal is a lot faster than that. So I have 2 asks. One is that as TriMet monitors the progress of Rose Lanes or the impact, that there's a willingness to be more nimble. And I've already seen that with the Burnside line. I think you said that you might change the schedule a year from now, and because of the significant consistent time savings, you've already changed the schedule within a couple months. Do I have this right? I have a massive volume of information coming at me constantly, but I think I got that right. So I would ask for that same willingness to reconsider if we see some really immediate significant benefits. And then the other commitment that I would love to see is, I know that you're spending upwards of $14 million a year to deal with congestion. And as you see operational savings, which I am almost certain you will, that money gets reinvested in increasing service on the Rose Lanes. Those are my 2
Message received, and I hope we look at this as a minimum commitment from us, given the resources that we can currently count on, and if we can do more, we will do more.
Yeah. And I'll just end by saying, when I did the congestion pricing tour of London and Stockholm, I don't think I waited more than 3 to 4 minutes for any mode of public transportation except the train to the airport in Stockholm, which was at 4 a.m. I think, Chris, how long did we wait? 7 minutes, maybe? So, granted, those cities are larger and they're much further ahead of us with their public transit system, and they have huge mode shares, but, I mean, that's what I'm aspiring to.
One more question, if I may. Would you state on the record, if we could find funding to make the entire system fare-free, would you be willing to do that?
God, look
And
at
I'm
the
asking
time.
Bernie.
Gotta go.
Well, Bernie, we've been having this conversation ever since Bernie got to TriMet, so
If there was, I'm going to say yes with a footnote.
you could just say yes and leave it
Well,
at that.
I can't, though. You know I can't.
Go ahead, go ahead.
There's always a yes, but. Farebox revenue is $100 million a year for us. $100 million a year in
Yeah,
revenue.
so we'd need to find that money for you.
The difficulty could be that, and I don't want to seem parsimonious, that with a free system, you would see additional ridership. So you can't just look at the lost fare revenue and say, okay, that would be enough to offset the additional cost. So if it covers the cost, the real cost of a free system, then yeah, absolutely yes.
Because
Yeah.
in Corvallis, when they did it, went fare free, it was a 37% increase in ridership.
Right.
So, but I think if we're talking about the climate crisis,
Right.
our planet is on fire, we need to take some bold moves. And so I would certainly be willing to work with you even after I've retired.
I look forward to
get
a
that done.
partnership. I just remind you that in Corvallis, it was the city that imposed a utility tax
Yes,
in order to
indeed.
pay for that.
So we'll have to
we're happy to
explore.
partner with you on that
Got it.
conversation.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. I just,
Hardesty.
thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank you all very much. And I am very critical of whether or not TriMet is a good partner. And the reason I am critical is because I sit in this seat and hear promises that are made, but I don't see any signatures on a dotted line with commitments. I have that today as far as what your vision is for between now and 2021. But I think that it would be really great to have, to invite city commissioners to come and talk to your board so that they understand the impact of the lack of investments in certain parts of the city have on the system. And to support my colleague, Commissioner Fritz, if we are talking about making lifelong public transit users, TriMet would be crazy not to be giving every kid a bus pass that's 12 months every year like clockwork. It is crazy not to do that.
Well, I can't help myself but point out that TriMet does put $1 million into the Portland Public Schools Student Pass Program, and the city doesn't.
Okay, can I let
I
wait.
can't. I'm saying,
Okay.
just.
We need to hear
There were a
from
lot
our
of years.
bosses on the Rose Lane project.
Yeah.
And we're all in agreement, I think philosophically, that there's questions about the youth pass, and we've had this conversation. There are questions about free transit, which I support. That's an important question we've discussed. And there's questions about governance and TriMet vis-a-vis the city, the county, and the region. But that's not what we're talking about today, and we need to hear from our bosses on what we are talking about
very happy
today.
to do
So
that.
unless
Thank you
there's
so
anything
much.
else
Really
related to
appreciate
the
it.
Rose
No.
Lanes, I'd like to get to public
Could I just have
testimony.
one
Commissioner
question for the
Fritz.
sponsor? And that's not for you, you can.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is the intent of the Rose Lanes to have them for TriMet and for institutional buses like PCC, Lewis and Clark,
Well, it's
OHSU?
funny you should ask that, because I actually just initiated that conversation with the Bureau last week and asked them in particular to look at the PCC Cascade to see Sylvania shuttle to see if there's overlap with Rose Lanes and to determine what, if anything, we'd need to do to allow that use. I think one catch is that, like I said, Rose Lanes are not just paint on the ground. There'll be specialized signals as well, and that requires some kind of technology on the bus that those shuttle buses may not have. So we have some details to figure out, but absolutely. I mean, I'm really jealous of Seattle. They have a van pool system, and if we had a van pool,
We only have one city in their transportation system.
right?
Well,
Yeah, so
So
the
I-
answer is yes, but we have more work to do on that question.
I heard a rumor that the transportation network companies want to have access to this.
That's not part of this conversation. They want access to all of our public right-of-way, but.
But they're rideshare, they're not public transportation.
Right, no, absolutely not.
Do we need to put something in the resolution to make that clear?
I don't believe so, because this is very narrowly focused on public transit. And it's about
Okay,
mass transit, yeah.
I'll give you a proposal that we could, let's
All
take
right.
testimony first
Yeah.
and then maybe
I
I'll
think
have
we
an
should. I
amendment.
think we need to hear from the public. Carla, how many people do we have signed up?
We have 30.
2 minutes each, please. Name for the record. The microphones slide around. When the red light goes off, please stop.
The first 3 are Terry Parker, Matt Otis, and Kim Marks, and they'll be followed by Aaron Brown, Alan Kessler, and Matthew Williams.
Welcome, thank you. And as Terry just noted, if somebody has written testimony for the council, just hand it to Carla, and then she'll make sure we all get a copy of it. Good afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Terry Parker. I'm from Northeast Portland. In January, I testified against removing a full-service traffic lane on Sandy Boulevard to add bike lanes. Doing so would significantly increase congestion, increase fuel consumption, and increase emissions on the corridor. Removing a full-service traffic lanes to add bat lanes on Sandy would have similar impacts. Cut-through traffic will increase. Any removal of on-street parking will create a negative impact for the small minority businesses that line Sandy and double the negative impacts on the nearby residential streets. The PBOT-ODOT MMA agreement, whereby PBOT cannot make a change to a surface street that would add congestion to I-84, still applies. As a relief valve for I-84, in particular for Washington traffic using the I-205 Glen Jackson Bridge, PBOT cannot reduce the motor vehicle capacity on Sandy without state involvement. During the evening commute, traffic lines up to access I-205 at Park Rose, at times backing up as far as Hollywood. Any plan that would reduce motor vehicle capacity must be accompanied by an environmental impact statement. At last week's hearing on the temporary 10 cents a gallon gas tax and the weight per mile tax for trucks, PBOT personnel made the comment after comment that everybody should pay their fair share. When motorists drive on a street, they pay a gas tax. For large trucks, it's the weight per mile tax. When bicyclists ride on that same street, possibly in gas tax-funded dedicated lanes of privilege, the bicyclists pay nothing. When a bus utilizes that same street, doing as much damage as 1,200 cars, transit riders are charged a fare that barely covers 25% of the operating costs and zero for the infrastructure costs. This is miles away from PBOT's equity that everybody should pay their fair share. Not everything can fit between the curbs on Sandy. The negative metrics, such as increasing congestion, must be equally weighted, and whereby the whole entire street needs to flow better. Thank you.
Well done, and under time.
Impressive. Yes.
Good job, Terry. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name's Ken Marks. I'm the director of Transportation Equity at the Rosewood Initiative in Outer East Portland. I am here today to encourage you to support this proposal, even though I do believe that it can be better. It has improved over time. I was quite dismayed when the original information came out and East Portland did not have any proposed corridors. Luckily, that has changed. We do look at this as a systems-wide issue, and we would note that there are a lot of bottlenecks downtown that impact Outer East Portland. However, we do believe that there is more room for more corridors to also be included as the pilot project becomes a full-bore, program. I want to also thank Commissioner Hardesty for her comments. I think that they are very spot on. Bernie, if you're behind me still, we look forward to holding your feet to the fire on no consolidation of bus stops. That's a hill we're willing to die on. We also would like to note that if you looked at those hexagon maps, East Portland does not benefit as much from this project. that is specifically due to the lack of service that TriMet has, provided in East Portland. And another comment for TriMet, you all do have your own taxing authority, and maybe you could start looking at implementing it. Also, I would note that TriMet did not or declined to seek funding through the T2020 process for operational funds to increase service.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hey there. My name is Matt Otis. I'm a Southeast Portland resident and been a big fan of y'all's for a long time. Watched you on YouTube. First time ever in this room, though. So some of you. I'm not a candidate, so don't want to be too honest there. So, all right. So what I wanted to do is, first off, I wanted to thank Commissioner Udaly and her staff. Or I don't think it's actually your staff. I don't really know. But basically,
It's
April
my
and
staff.
Jamie.
Yes,
And
Jamie's
I wanna-
mine, April is Peabot's,
All right. Sweet. So,
but we're all one family.
thank all y'all. I appreciate it for your work on the Rose Lane project. The Rose Lane project is a really transformative change in how we can allocate the public right away and make transit more reliable and attractive by prioritizing buses. And in doing so, we can move our community a lot closer to our equity goals and our climate goals. To do this well, I really ask that we kind of hold the traffic engineers to task to focus on moving people rather than simply moving cars. Just because cars are flowing doesn't mean people are moving. They're not the same things. Kind of not. All right. And I ask that the tools that you use to gather feedback on the project are subject to more equitable and people-centric channels. So make sure that overall opinions are held. So, oh wow, time goes fast here. This is fun. All right. So, I think there's a couple key points to making this a success. First, don't use the classic traffic models that ignore reduced demand, promote single occupancy auto use. Second, use equitable feedback tools so that the loudest people with plenty of leisure time, like me, 3:30 on a, got lucky today. So also require engineers document their decision process so when we go back, we know what they decided and why. And if they're gonna change from some of the better off measures, please let us know why. Also be bold. This is probably gonna be a success. Okay, so get excited about it. Add lanes on all the corridors. Take everything from 205 to the hills and give us a straight shot, like luxury lanes the whole way for buses. That would be fantastic. So be direct with the staff. This is transformative change. PBOT needs to treat it as transformative change. It'd be super awesome. So don't just be safe and normal, and this is according to the standard guides for the US. Like, let's have some fun here. Let's do something great.
I mean, did
So-
you see the red carpet?
I did see the red carpet. I'm going to get me some cookies later, too. So anyhow, so you need to pursue more of this BRT, bus rapid transit, be bold in its application, and please approve it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks to all three of you. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Aaron Brown, Alan Kessler, and Matthew Williams. And they'll be followed by Doug Klotz, Jeffrey Yaskin, and Doug Allen.
Very good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm a renter living in the St. John's neighborhood of North Portland. My favorite bus line is the 44, and I'm here to testify in support of the Rose Lane project led by PBOT and Commissioner Udaly. I know I'm usually here to testify to shoot spitballs, but today I'm here to congratulate the elected officials and PBOT staff who have put this proposal together. This is arguably the most important initiative for climate justice, transportation justice, and general affordability that our municipal government and transportation has put forth in decades. And I made the time on my calendar to come out to testify because I wanted to say I was there the day that our local government began to take these steps in this direction. When I was little, I was one of those kids that collected bus and transit maps. As a college student, I put them up in my dorm, and now as an adult, I'm the type of guy that spends money getting those maps framed. As many as my roommates will allow me to put on the walls. These maps are fascinating to me because I'm a geek, but also for a variety of reasons. They demonstrate a vision, and they explain a vision of a city comprised of distinct, walkable, storied neighborhoods connected by low-carbon, accessible, affordable, and desirable transit. These maps also show a Portland where we see the neighborhoods that aren't near city centers like Lents, Gateway, St. John's, Cully, as interconnected community centers with abundant housing, jobs, bars, restaurants, schools that are all a quick, reliable, frequent, and cheap ride from each other. I see that in the Rose Lane project document. It's a bold statement of a vision of Portland where we make this happen, where we realign our existing public resources and infrastructure, the enormous amount of right-of-way we dedicate to privatized, carbon-intensive, socially isolating automobiles, to reflect our values and goals of a public, low-carbon, communal network where Portlanders sit shoulder to shoulder on the bus ride home. Running out of time, today's the first step. We got to pass it, but we definitely got to make sure step by step that when folks come out and say we need this parking spot, no, we need the bus to move through here. I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't also remind you that the Oregon Transportation Commission is scheduled to vote on the environmental assessment of the Rose Quarter Freeway expansion next month. I bring this up because the 4, 44, and 77 bus lanes and the Portland streetcar actually end up with more congestion and slower times with this $800 million project as the EA is currently put forward. So I only bringing it up to say that if we're passionate about making transit move frequently and fast through our neighborhood corridors, we need to be looking at that.
We're doing so well in your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was the story about the maps that took him over.
About the maps that we all got excited about.
Right.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It's amazing. I've been grinning all day. Yeah, I can't believe this happened so quickly, and it's incredible. The one lane we put in right outside of City Hall, the impact that's had, and you're going to be nationally famous for doing this. This is going to be transformative. Please, give it everything.
Well, not everything.
Please give it everything it deserves. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So I'm really happy, and I could laud you all day, but I'm gonna shoot some spitballs. Parks and Rec right now has an opportunity to stop this freeway expansion. And this is important, this is relevant because we're about to spend all of this money and all of this political capital on rolling out the red lanes, and then we're gonna break it. We're gonna break the Rose Quarter, we're gonna break the train, we're gonna break the streetcar for what, 5 years, 10, it's gonna drag out. And any momentum we're gonna get is gonna be gone. We have to stop this freeway. This freeway cannot ruin our transit network. Parks Department right now has been secretly meeting with ODOT to put together a concurrence agreement that building a freeway lane over the Esplanade will have a de minimis impact on that park facility. If they cannot get that, if they cannot get our concurrence, our Parks Department concurrence, they need to do a 4F study. That pushes them out. They have to do a real environmental impact study. I don't know why this was happening in secret, but this needs to not happen in secret. We need to have public hearings about this study, because this is a tool we can use to stop the freeway. We need, as a city, to be saying to ODOT, you cannot break our transportation network. Whatever you're doing, it's not going to be that. We have to be saying to TriMet, it's not okay that you're spending $1 billion on a choo-choo train that's going to be, here in a decade, when that same money, we're spending $10 million on the Rose Lane, maybe if we can find it. What kind of transformation could we get with that with rail money? Let's do this for real. Let's make Portland a great transportation city.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of the Southeast Uplift Neighborhood Coalition as the vice chair. The mission of the Southeast Neighborhood Coalition is to collaborate with Southeast Portland community to build informed, inclusive, and participatory neighborhoods that support our social and ecological well-being. Recognizing that the Rose Lane project supports this mission and provides benefit to the city's Southeast neighborhoods and the city as a whole, the Southeast Uplift Board of Directors urges your support for advancing the Rose Lane project. We ask that City Council direct PBOT to move forward with identifying pilot corridors to focus study. Understanding the nature of a pilot project, we ask that City Council direct PBOT to identify context-sensitive tools with the greatest capacity to enhance transit reliability and the ability to be implemented within the 1-year timeframe. The Rose Lane project is an important step towards prioritizing transit, making transit more reliable and attractive to people who have the ability to use it, and helping the community to reach our equity and climate goals while addressing the challenges posed by a growing population. There's a severe time penalty associated with transit in Portland compared to driving. This penalty most adversely affects transit-dependent folks, but also discourages new users and pushes people with means to choose to drive instead. Greenhouse gas emissions are increasing in the region and the state purely due to increased emissions from driving. The Rose Lane project is an important tool in approaching our multi-year goal of 25% of trips made by transit, and with the potential benefit of less greenhouse gas emissions and improved air quality. The board notes that the Rose Lane project concept has the potential to advance equity in the region's transit network by reducing delay in the most congested areas, allowing riders to experience shorter travel times on longer cross-country or cross-city trips, and making transit use a more viable option for those trips to and from work, school, medical appointments, and daycare pickups that require dependable travel times. Those reductions in travel times, increases in dependability within the transit network, increase access to opportunity, lessen isolation of community members that result from displacement, and supports our ecological and social well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of you. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Doug Klotz, Jeffrey Yaskin, and Doug Allen, and they'll be followed by David McCoy, David Stein, and Addie Leverett.
Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Doug Klotz. I support the Rose Lane pilot project and urge you to move forward with this important plan. Thank you to Commissioner Udaly, Jamie Duhamel, and April Bertelsen for their work in developing this plan. My wife, Marcia Hanshaw, and I were early supporters of the Portland Bus Lane project, and we support the Rose Lane project, which will carry that work forward. As the first 3 lane installations have shown, this project can make a marked difference in transit times on key routes throughout the city, and difference which I understand cascade on to further east. Better transit is a key to reducing carbon emissions, but also to achieving transportation equity. I trust that the project includes traffic engineers who, as Matt said, measure throughput of people, not just the number of cars, and would prioritize bus loads of riders over a line of single occupant vehicles to make our street system work for all. I've been an active transportation advocate in Portland for 30 years, and I think that this initiative will be the most effective action the city has taken to meet its mode split goals, climate goals, and equity goals. And at one point, yes, you can have electric articulated buses. They've had them in San Francisco for decades. They have overhead wires. You don't have to worry about running out of battery power. But I know you have to build the wires.
I wonder if we have more rain in San Francisco, but I guess that's a
No, they work in the rain.
Well, yeah, but fine.
Oh, I don't know.
Next.
I'm Jeffrey Yaskin. I live in Southeast. First, I wanted to call out that I'm fairly privileged, so please give more weight to the less privileged testimony from less privileged people. So with Portland's increasing population, we need to build capacity to move more and more people around the city. We can't do that with private cars. Private cars take physically too much space per person. They emit too much carbon dioxide per person, and they're more difficult to electrify than a bus fleet. And the tires emit too many toxic particulates per person. So we need to attract more people to mass transit. To do that, the transit needs to get where people need to go in a predictably short amount of time. The transit can't be predictable and quick if it's blocked behind other traffic. So we need dedicated lanes, which the Rose Lane project does. Please build it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
President Hardesty and Commissioners, my name is Doug Allen. I'm a member of Bus Riders Unite and also the Portland Bus Lane Project, but I'm speaking only for myself. I retired 7 years ago from TriMet, and before that I worked 35 years, a large part of that in the TriMet scheduling department, and I have to say that this is a dream come true for somebody whose professional life was around efficiently scheduling transit vehicles, because this will save so much time and money that can then go into service for people. Transit priority is not something new. Bernie kindly pointed out that the Portland Bus Mall was a big step forward, but throughout my history at TriMet, I never saw this level of cooperation between TriMet and the City of Portland to add service and put in bus priority in an efficient manner. But this does need a big investment, and what you're doing now is just a start with your pilots. You're going to need big investments in signals. You're going to be needing, and I don't mean taking out, but relocating some bus stops where they're before a signal to being right after a signal to allow the signal priority to work efficiently. We currently have a very first generation signal priority system that's very ineffective. We're hoping to see something much better come out of this. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this and hope that TriMet steps up and provides the needed service to provide that increase in ridership that we all know we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Caller, please call the next three.
Are David McCoy, David Stein, and Addie Leverett, and they'll be followed by Josie Mikolashkas, Chris Fugura, and Mary Margaret Wheeler-Weber.
Good afternoon. My name's David McCoy. I live in Southeast. I ride the 15 and the 8. I'm here to strongly support the Rose Lane project. I ride the bus, but I also drive far more than I wish I did. I have the privilege to make that choice, and I make it largely because when I leave the house with my infant strapped to me and my toddler holding my hand, you leave the house without a car in your car seats, you are putting yourself at the mercy of the transportation system. So I need to know that morning that I will be able to get off work early enough to go downtown, get my kids, and get them on the bus before the car congestion starts. Too many times I've been standing on the corner for 30 minutes watching full bus after full bus pass our stop without stopping, bunched up with a crying child, crying baby, and melting down toddler. So thank you for putting forward this initiative to fix this. One thing I want to call out, the map of the enhancements is beautiful. Big, bold vision, red lines all the way across. I understand that it may not look like that in practice. There may be a little dotted family circus line, but you have the choice to stand up against the what is asked of you is save these parking spots, save these turn lanes. And it's more than time saved. There's also a physical experience of riding the bus. The status quo, which privileges cars, has the bus swerving in and out and merging with traffic. Last year, the bus pulled out was trying to merge into the traffic lane. The car cut it off, but driver slammed on the brakes. My toddler was thrown out of his seat and face hit the chair in front of him. Luckily, the chair was there. He still loves the bus. Please make this, take this anxiety off of me and every other parent who tries to make a new generation of transit riders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is David Stein. I'm a Southwest Portland resident, a low-carbon transportation rider. I should disclose that I'm also the vice chairperson of the Portland Bicycle Advisory Committee, though I'm speaking on my behalf. We submitted a letter. And I just want to emphasize a few points that bicycles and transit get along very well together. They're complementary, it should not be an adversarial thing. I'm hoping that with these Rose lanes, as they're implemented, that bicycles will have the option of using them. When we're talking about bus drivers, they are professionals and they're able to conduct themselves in a much more responsible manner than most drivers that we see on the road in private vehicles. I also want to call out TriMet a little bit. A lot of what they've done in the past hasn't shown that they're operating to really benefit us as much as possible. We've seen that with the shelters. We're seeing that with the Rose Quarter, with how things will be impacted with Southwest Corridor, the report that was just released, where they're only making improvements on Barber and nothing outside of that, or very little outside of that, which is going to strain us. I would really love to see that as these Rose lanes go in, that there's a lot of thought put into how we can really make the most of this opportunity and get as many people riding as possible. And we should not hesitate to take away parking spots. We should not hesitate to take away space from single occupancy vehicles that really are not good for our system. And taking out parking spots has the benefit of also reducing that demand for people to drive, because there's nowhere for them to go. So if you don't have anywhere to go, then you can take the bus.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Adie Leverett. I'm here representing Business for a Better Portland, and the Line 20 is my bus. A year and a half ago, back in the early days of BBPDX, we sent you a letter in support of the Enhanced Transit Corridors Plan. Unfortunately, Commissioner Hardesty wasn't yet elected, so she didn't receive that letter. But I bet the rest of you might remember this. I know you get a lot of letters, but this one was a little bit notable in that it was a letter in support of bus lanes signed by 48 local businesses. That's right, 48 local businesses actually took the time to support dedicated bus lanes. And though much has changed in 18 months, we have new leadership from Commissioner Daly and Director Warner, and BBPDX has grown rapidly to over 400 members. We continue to focus our advocacy on the vision of a safe, efficient, and equitable transportation system at the city, regional, and state levels. So why do businesses care about bus lanes? Our members clearly recognize the connection between the effective functioning of the transportation system and economic vitality. The streets of our city are the circulatory system of our economy. They are the essential routes that carry people to work and goods to market. And if those streets are dangerous, polluted, and congested, then our economy suffers, and so does the quality of life that we trade on and hold so dear. Moreover, people riding the bus to work, am I doing this right?
Too close.
Too close, sorry. People riding the bus to work have become subject to ever-increasing commute times and time wasted in traffic. This is especially problematic if you're a worker who clocks in at a particular time. You simply cannot be late. So if we're serious about growing our grassroots economy, reducing pollution, and creating economic opportunity for all, it's critical that we free the city's buses from traffic gridlock. I wrote a lot more here, but I guess I should skip to the part about how what a privilege it was to participate in the advisory group convened by Commissioner Udaley's office to help guide the development of this project. And I want to commend Jamie Duhamel and the PBOT staff for conducting a thorough and collaborative process driven by a clearly articulated vision of improving transportation outcomes for people, and especially people of color. The city is well served by leveraging the vast expertise of community leaders, and it was an honor to work alongside them.
Thank you. Thanks, all three.
Thank you.
Next three, please, Carla.
Are Josie Mikolashka, sorry about the pronunciation, Chris Figura, and Mary Margaret Wheeler-Weber, and they'll be followed by Anna Kemper, Hank Stowers, and I believe it's Colin Hensky.
Good afternoon.
I want to note that I have
Today.
multiple classmates from the PSU Traffic and Transportation course in the room. Thanks for being here, guys.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor Ted Wheeler. I want to, first of all, thank you, Daly and Joanne, for setting up my testimony very well. For the record, my name is Jose Mikolaskis. I am the Climate Justice Organizer at Verde. I'm an elected Bus Riders Unite leader. I'm here to express gratitude for the work in the Rose Lane project. Projects like Rose Lane make us believe that at least some of our leaders actually know and feel that public transit is a lifeline to our communities. We know that Rose Lanes has had major success in making our transportation system more effective. My current concern is that we are investing heavily in Inner Portland, while East Portland and Cully are not receiving the same investment. While yes, Rose Lanes relieve pressure in our transit system, which does extend to East Portland, given that Inner Portland is heavy with bottlenecks, this does not excuse the lack of investment in East Portland and in Cully. Inner Portland gets to have bottleneck issues because there are several buses that overlap with each other, but in East Portland and Cully, we do not have the same abundance of access. We know that we need to start making a transformational shift in what neighborhoods we are investing in, but we need action to ensure people and the city of Portland will prioritize an increase in service in East Portland and Cully to make more Rose Lanes a viable option in those communities. This means working with TriMet to increase service lines to interconnect outer parts of our city. For example, in some locations in Cully, it takes over an hour to move folks 1.5 miles, and there is no bus that goes directly downtown. What we've seen TriMet propose is simply not enough and is taking too long to implement. We understand that Rose Lanes will help our disadvantaged communities just through the sheer number of community members that use transit. And while some of us do go downtown, not all of us need to, and we need adequate bus service interconnecting our own communities. One Inner Portland-like transit system is interconnecting East Portland and Cully. Not only will adding Rose Lanes in those communities increase transit efficiency, but will also increase the safety we've been seeking in these communities, since Rose Lanes would lead to getting more cars off the road. As you continue this good work with the Rose Lane project and our communities encourage you forward, we impatiently wait for your next public transportation project and hope that you keep moving us forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Chris Figuera. I was born and raised in North Portland, lived here my whole life, over 42 years. And over the years, Portland has become one of the desirable cities in the country to live. Each day, about 100 people move here. And with that many people moving here, the roads are obviously getting congested, and we definitely need to do something to kind of free up traffic and make things flow more smoothly. The Rose Lane project, after listening today, is not it. I believe that a better way to kind of spend the money after kind of listening to everything going on would be to maybe increase more buses. And they were saying kind of more frequently and full and all that kind of stuff. Currently, right now, buses are usually full maybe 3 times a day. You got early morning, kind of afternoon school kids, and then late at night for the people returning home from work. And no matter if you have buses going every 5 minutes, during the period of time people are at work, those buses are going to be empty except for a few people. And so to shut down a major traffic lane, which people are commuting through, you know, a few people that are waiting for a bus because they, you know, don't time it right and wait an extra 10 minutes, it doesn't seem like it's serving the bigger picture. And so I'd like to see something that serves everybody as a whole so we could spend that money better. And I'd say increase the bus routes out to eastern Portland and other areas that are kind of isolated right now and don't have the bus routes. Also, you have about 650,000 people each day and 350,000 cars added to our roadways from each city. Daily, people, many single mothers and fathers have to commute, take their children to school and themselves to work for most of the day, then have to pick their children up and return to home. These people are from Portland, Clackamas, Gresham, Sandy, Beaverton, and other areas, which is just not reasonable to ride a bike from or spend 4 hours plus waiting for and riding public transportation. Not to mention, many people have jobs which require them to drive around in the city each day, and with the increased traffic you're creating, we'll soon be looking for more driver-friendly cities to do business in, and they're going to move out of this city, and we're going to lose money.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Margaret Wheeler-Weber, and I'm chair of the Portsmouth Neighborhood Association. Portsmouth is on the North Portland Peninsula between Kenton and St. John's. I think you probably know that. Some of our assets include the wonderful communities of New Columbia and Bridge Meadows, the fabulous Columbia Pool, and the number 4, number 75, and number 35 buses. The number 35 is my favorite bus, and until about 5 years ago, it was a great way to get downtown, and it was how I got to work on most days. In the last five years or so, I've lived in Portsmouth for over 20 years, it's gotten slower and slower, stuck in traffic, to the point where I now drive to work most days. This is in spite of knowing that climate change is real, in spite of getting a free bus pass from work, in spite of owning a bus-themed T-shirt, and in spite of being a regular bus commuter in the past. I actually enjoy a ride that doesn't suck out my life force by the time I get home from work. But I just I can't bring myself to spend 2 hours a day on my work commute now. I work in the inner southeast and can drive there in 15 minutes and get home in 30 minutes if I drive. And after working a 9-hour day, I have other things in my life I'd like to do, like making dinner, talking to my husband, going swimming in Columbia Pool. So improving the time it takes to get to and home from work on the bus will make a huge difference to me. It'll have a huge impact on my neighbors, too. Portsmouth actually isn't that far out, and it used to be pretty easy on the bus. And it should be easy for us to get to work on the bus again. I think sometimes people forget that Portsmouth also includes a lot of communities that continue to be very marginalized economically and left out in a lot of ways. So I'm really glad you're doing this. I'm so grateful that the number 35 is included, but I'm also really looking forward to the overall impact. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing what comes next and how you continue to put transit first. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Anna Kemper, Hank Stowers, and I believe it's Colin Hersling. It's a Gmail 2456 address. Sorry, thanks. Okay, and they'll be followed by David Binning, Richard Shepard, and John Gove.
Good afternoon.
All right, hello. My name is Anna Kemper, and I'm here today on behalf of Sunrise PDX, one of many hubs across the nation, a part of the Sunrise Movement. We're a growing coalition of young people who are concerned about climate change and care about creating a just and sustainable future for all. Thank you for your time today. I'm 23 years old, and climate change looms around every decision regarding my future. Science says we have less than 10 years now to make bold political changes at every level of government and at every sector of our lives in order to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. In Oregon, as we know, 40% of our carbon emissions come from transportation. So let's take a moment to imagine what Portland could look like in 10 years. Where as a city would we like to be? What decisions would we want to have made in 2020? In regards to public transportation, I would hope that we would have taken bold, progressive action such as the Rose Lane project. We're grateful to Commissioner Udaly and her team for the hours they've already put into this project, and thank you to the physical labor that has already gone towards the pilots. We hope Council will use your authority to lean on PBOT and TriMet to continue to push for transit justice in our city. To the PBOT and TriMet staff here today, as you formulate your timeline and continue implementing the projects, please remember, we are fighting for an equitable and livable future. We have no time to waste in our transportation planning. Our lives and our children's lives are on the line. As a city, we must be swift and equitable in our climate action. Sunrise is excited for the proposed Rose Lane projects, and we are ready to push PBOT, TriMet, and eventually ODOT to prioritize bigger, bolder projects, especially east of 82nd. Creating swift and safe transportation for all is key to environmental and climate justice work. City leaders owe it to marginalized communities and to my generation's future to treat the climate crisis like the emergency it is. Vote yes to adopt the Rose Lane project and recommendations. We're counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, council members. My name is Hank Stowers. I am a resident of the Buckman neighborhood, an avid member of Sunrise PDX, and also a TriMet honored citizen. So thank you all for being here. I'm here to give my full support to the Rose Lane project. I am a huge fan of this. Commissioner Udaly, thank you so much for this. This is awesome. Thank you to everyone else that's worked on this as well. It is truly invigorating to be living in a city where we can have forward-thinking, progressive transportation measures that will directly impact my life. Really quick before I start, I just want to point out that for the past 3 years, transportation has been definitively the single greatest cause of greenhouse gases in the world. So as you see folks with these climate justice or transit justice equals climate justice signs, I just want you all to keep in mind that that is a very literal statement. I work 2 jobs, and it totals to about 60 to 70 hours a week. And I am also a dedicated public transportation user. I do not use a car to get to my work, so it can be pretty taxing on time. Yesterday, when I was riding home, I was stuck in traffic downtown, and like I said, I live on the east side. And I left work at around 4:30 p.m. and it took me 2.5 hours more than it should have taken me to get home. Yeah, it was a long wait. And while I was waiting, I was reflecting on the fact that, you know, as a youth activist, I was feeling particularly miffed that between my 2 jobs and my engagement and passion for my community, I was stuck on a bus that I like being on, but not for 2.5 hours longer than I should be.
Nobody wants that.
So I want to let you all know that I fully support this, and it's going to make a huge impact in our lives. In closing, there is a quote by Tony K. Bambara, which says that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. If you want to revolutionize public transportation, access, equity, and climate responsibility, then I urge you folks in power today to craft and undertake the most robust and irresistible version of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Colin Herring. I ride the 33, 12, and 44 lines on any given day, and I'm here on behalf of Sunrise PDX. I'd like to talk about the importance of public transportation and share my support for the Rose Lane project. I'd first like to thank Commissioner Udaly and PBOT for the work that has already gone into the Rose Lane project. It's an outstanding opportunity to expand public transportation access for low-income and frontline communities, as well as make public transportation feasible in the heart of high-traffic areas, where buses are constantly delayed due to the high volume of car traffic. This project, while just the beginning, bodes well for what is to come in this city. I'm excited to push the project forward, and I look forward to doing so. However, I think we can all agree that it will not by itself be enough to reach net zero emissions or fix the problems our city faces, helping our many communities travel across the metro area. As a commuting student who works in the city many nights a week, I know traveling late at night is exponentially more difficult than during the day, and I've shared long nights at small bus stops with fellow citizens all around the city because the bus simply isn't scheduled to come more than every hour, sometimes longer. Some buses don't even run past 9 p.m., which at that point I'm still at work. This means there's still more work to be done, regardless of the steps we are taking with this project. The expansions I was happy to see range beyond central and downtown Portland. However, transit beyond 82nd on the east side of the river still requires a massive overhaul. Transportation justice is climate justice, and marginalized communities of color displaced to the farthest reaches of the metro area deserve equitable and accessible public transportation throughout the city. I'm testifying not only for full implementation of the Rose Lane project, but to make sure the elected officials and policymakers in this room know that Sunrise is ready to go badger TriMet to increase funding for more service in East Portland. Sunrise is ready to go badger ODOT to facilitate a jurisdictional transfer 82nd Avenue. We have your back here, and we have your back as we heckle institutions that have less democratic accountability, but are holding us back from transportation and climate justice. I wanted to say more, but I know time is short. Pressure should be on TriMet, the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and the City of Portland to be taking care of the people who use these services every single day and couldn't survive without them. Please vote yes on the Rose Lane project, and remember that we have a lot more work to do past this before we solve the climate crisis or the issue of public transportation in this city. I'm looking at you, City Council, but I'm also looking right behind me at TriMet. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you.
Just barely.
Make the revolution irresistible.
Hey, the revolution.
Love it.
Next three are David Binning, Richard Shepard, and John Gove, and they'll be followed by Glenn Bridger, Don Bach, and Richa Podjal.
Good afternoon. Would you like to go ahead?
Oh,
Go for it.
let's let them go first.
Who says they're not?
Stranger things have happened in this chamber, by the way.
No.
Just so you know.
I'm sure. My name is John Gove. I'm a Southeast Portland resident. I'm also a TriMet bus driver. Have been for 4 years, and just for the record, I ride my bike to work every day. As a TriMet bus operator, I have a front row seat to the daily impacts of the congestion caused by too many vehicles operating in too little or poorly designed roadway space. I experienced firsthand the snowball effect of traffic delays. When one bus gets delayed due to traffic congestion, it affects all the buses on that line, as it has been testified earlier today. I see the frustrated faces at the bus stops when an overfull bus drives by them, passing them up. The Rose lanes and dedicated bus lanes help reduce or entirely eliminate this problem. As a passenger, if you can't trust that the bus you would like to take is going to consistently be on time, then you have no choice but to take the next earliest bus. This disrupts your entire home schedule in the morning and affects when you get home at night. Passengers feel a loss of control. It's no wonder so many choose to drive. The Rose Lane project and others PBOT and TriMet are implementing will bring people back into the bus because it brings consistency and trust back into the scheduling during the times that matter most to the working families. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you for your service with TriMet. We appreciate it.
Was
Next three,
there a David Binning or Richard Shepard? Then the next will go with Glenn Bridger, Don Bach, and Richa Pudyal. And they'll be followed by Clint Culpepper, Matt Floden, and Cassandra Griffin.
Would you go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Richa Podal. I am the Advocacy Director at the Street Trust. I'm also transit dependent. The Street Trust, alongside many of our partners that are here today, have been involved in the advisory team to Commissioner Udaly and staff leading up to today. We've been pretty vocal around prioritizing investments for our communities of color, ensuring that buses, especially in East Portland, are faster and more reliable. And we've demanded taking a holistic approach to measuring success, including striving for improvements in reliability for people taking the bus not just to work, but also to see their families access food, community, and healthcare. We're glad to see many of the priorities reflected in the plan today. There are still some pieces that we need to see carried forward as part of this process. Enhanced transit investments like BAT lanes and signal priority do not exist in a silo. We must be simultaneously ensuring that the community sees the results of transit investments that include increased frequency, additional new lines, and that these improvements are centered on our low-income communities and communities of color. I have some asks. We ask Council to set clear expectations for TriMet on a bold set of service improvements, especially in East Portland, to accompany the rollout of both Phase 1 and Phase 2. We also asked to see more clarity on a plan for funding for Phase 2. We were here in 2018 when we adopted an unfunded ETC plan, and this time we really need to make sure that we're seeing, the community is seeing benefits in faster travel and increased service. And I just want to say thank you to Jamie and PBOT for facilitating that stakeholder process. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Morning, City Council, and if
Somewhere.
put up,
No, somewhere it's morning.
it's morning.
Somebody's got money.
You're
Scoring
right.
somewhere, yeah.
My name is Glenn Bridger, and together with Don Bach, we are going to be addressing a specific project that is included in the proposal. And that is the project that is on the graphic. This is Capitol Highway that runs from Barber on through the Hillsdale Commercial District to the beginning of the Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway. The project removes both the eastbound, a single eastbound and a single westbound lane through the commercial district of the Hillsdale Town Center, as well as removing the westbound lane all the way from Barber up to the commercial district. So it is having a significant impact in our area, and I want to address two main concerns for both of us. One is we don't want to see a decrease in the pedestrian and bicycle safety of the residents in our area unless you find a way to mitigate this, because there will be potential problems here. Second is we don't want to see jeopardizing the fragile commercial activity in the Hillsdale Town Center Commercial District. We know that there is going to be traffic diversion. When you remove half of the traffic from an area, there is going to be diversion. And that diversion is a problem because this part of Portland does not have street redundancy. There are no parallel streets that the traffic can move onto, or the people can walk on, or the bikes can go on. PBOT found out how tenuous this was when they tried to put in bike greenways, and they could not find good through routes. Those bike greenways are in fact going to become the future diversion routes for all the traffic that cannot go on these through routes. So that is a serious area. I would like to ask you, as you go through the project, to consider two other major projects affecting our community. One is the light rail project that will go down Barber that will have an impact on traffic. Second is the tolling of I-5, which will also have a traffic impact in our area.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors.
Good afternoon.
Commissioners. I'm Don Bach, Hillsdale. The devil's in the details. Like many things in this city, one size does not fit all. And in Southwest, particularly in Hillsdale, we have very constrained traffic alternatives. And when changing one thing changes a lot of things. The chart in front of you shows a number of red lines. Those are streets that will be affected by dropping one lane on Capitol Highway. And in my notes, you can see mitigations that we're asking for. The business impact are expected to be significant because if we make it more difficult for cars to go through, and we're basically a car-dependent community in Southwest. There's no question about that, even though we have a lot of bus lines that go through Hillsdale. The business community would be severely impacted by reduced traffic through, at least that's our view, and needs to be considered. One of the things, if we take the lane off, we want mitigation for is something that's in our Hillsdale plan would be to actually make a possible to pro time, that is when it's not a busy time, to have parking on one side of the street in this bus lane, which would require building basically improving the bike lane along that stretch of work. The second thing, mitigation-wise, we'd like to make sure that this little circle you see here is 300 feet of extended shoulder we need to have built between Westwood and Cheltenham, which is a very dangerous, steep part of the streets. Bicyclists have a difficult time getting there. Mitigation from pedestrians, we need to have that. In addition, traffic calming on these streets. One of the things that's important, traffic calming, the city doesn't have a record of getting below 25 miles an hour with their speed bumps. We need to have either more creative ways of doing it or more speed bumps in terms of the density. Finally, the business area, the final thing I really want to emphasize is it will adversely affect ped bike safety on those streets that the diverted traffic's on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you both. Thank you all three of you.
Mayor.
Commissioner Udaly had a comment.
Well, thank you for bringing your concerns.
I'm sorry, can you?
Thank you for bringing your concerns to council. I want to make it clear that the corridor that you are talking about is part of Phase 2. It is still in development. There are multiple options. There have been no decisions made. We'll have additional exploration in the corridor, including potential mitigation. And I said it before, I'll say it again. a red line doesn't mean we're taking out an entire lane for the entire length of the corridor. It means there are a variety of solutions being considered for that corridor. And I would hope you'd know by now that pedestrian and bike safety is a topmost priority for my office and for PBOT. So
We
look
appreciate that,
forward
and
to.
we just wanted to make sure that you
Yeah.
understood that the concerns are very valid, we feel, in Hillsdale. And
Sure.
appreciate getting a baseline of what the actual conditions are before we start anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you very
That's
much.
good, Don. We appreciate that.
May I make
Thank you.
a quick comment?
Commissioner Fritz.
Capital already goes down to one lane. Capital already goes down to one lane after Wilson High School. So I had similar concerns in Capital and 49th going up to PCC Sylvania, which went from 4 lanes to one on each side with a center turn lane. It's remarkably improved the pedestrian and bike safety. The cars go slower. They funnel together. It is more difficult to get into those off the side streets, but that's not a problem in the Hillsdale Town Centre. So I would just encourage you to have a look at what's been done south of Barber, because it might address some of those concerns.
We're not opposed to this project. We really just want to make sure that if there's issues, we can get them solved as we go forward.
Absolutely.
29,000 cars a day come up that hill.
Yeah, no,
Thank
that
you.
makes good sense. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Appreciate it. Next 3, please, Carla.
Are Clint Culpepper, Matt Floden, and Cassandra Griffin. And then they'll be followed by the last 2 will be Sharon Nassett and Keel Johnson.
Good afternoon.
Hello. I think Clint's first.
All right.
Go for it.
All right, go for it.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Clint Culpepper. I'm the Transportation Options Manager at Portland State University, here to represent the tens of thousands of students and employees that we have. Portland State University is a strong supporter of the Rose Lane pilot project. As one of the largest generators of daily trips in the central city, we recognize the importance of reducing our contribution to congestion and emissions. PSU, in partnership with TriMet and the city, has made great strides with nearly 13,000 and 1,700 employees now riding transit daily. This amounts to 49% of PSU students and 40% of employees, outpacing the city as a whole and exceeding the city's climate action goals. But there remains more that we can do to help our city and our climate. Students and employees continue to express their desire for faster and more reliable transit, including those who currently commute to PSU alone in a car. The Rose Lane project promises to prioritize transit in a fundamental way that reflects the value and potential of our public right-of-ways. It will, through decreased travel time and increased reliability, allow partners like PSU to shift many more trips onto transit. It also further opens the door to affordable and reliable transportation choices for our students, many of whom struggle with the high cost of living while attending university and working hard to create a better future. We'd like to thank the PBOT staff that are committed to making this project happen, as well as Commissioner Udaley for championing the concept. We ask that the City Council approve the Rose Lane pilot project as put forth by PBOT, and we urge Commissioner Udaley and PBOT and TriMet leadership to ensure the Rose Lane projects move forward with the largest possible benefit to current and future transit riders.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Flodine. I'm currently a resident in Tualatin and will be moving to Southeast this weekend.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. What was that?
I said, welcome to the big city.
Yep. I fully support the Rose Lane project. These dedicated bus lanes will motivate me to take the bus more by speeding up bus trips and giving the bus the priority that it deserves. The chief complaints that I hear from my friends and family and from myself as well is oftentimes that the bus is just too slow, and by taking my car, I can get to my end destination faster. And it makes sense. But on the other hand, when I look around Portland, it doesn't make any sense to see a vehicle, a bus, that can carry like roughly 40 people sitting, maybe up to 60 people if you really pack it out, waiting for a few vehicles which are only carrying 1 to 2 people, maybe 5 if you're lucky. So people like me who own a car but who are also open to using the bus, we need the bus to be a fast, a feasible, a reliable option for getting to work and the grocery store and everywhere else on time. If the bus is significantly slower than my car, then I'm not going to be as motivated to take the bus every day of the week. I know that the bus is the more environmentally friendly option. I know that I can save money on gas. I know that I can not have to look for a parking spot. But at the end of the day, what's going to convince me is the travel time. We've already seen buses blow by traffic on, I believe, Madison, the Burnside Bridge. Once these improvements start coming in, that's only going to be multiplied, which I'm all for. So if the Rose Lane project is implemented, I will definitely take the bus more than I currently do. And I very much look forward to this project being implemented. I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for your time and attention. My name is Cassandra Griffin. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Cycling Center. We are a 25-year-old transportation justice organization that wants all people to be able to get where they need and want to go. If we can use bicycles to help them do that, we will. And if that's not the right option for them, we want them to have other great options, preferably for free, at least for youth, but ideally for all riders. We have been honored to serve on the advisory committee for this, and we thank Commissioner Udaley for her leadership. The Rose Lane project is the biggest transportation initiative we have seen out of City Hall ever that focuses explicitly on improving outcomes for marginalized people, and we applaud that. We also agree with Commissioner Hardesty that there's a lot more to do, and we want to see it happen. And now my computer wants to update. In order to meet our climate goals and to do what we can to preserve a livable planet, we need to be getting people out of cars. This is a perfect tool to make riding the bus a little bit more appealing and to make driving a little bit less appealing, and we need to just take those steps. In closing, I want to emphasize that we are all multimodal. I have a primarily bike riding household, but today my wife drove our car because she's 8 months pregnant and can't fit into her rain pants. I took the bus because I didn't want to be managing wet rain pants and gear in this lovely room. So we're all multimodal, and no matter what anyone does to get around, getting more people on buses and getting buses moving quicker benefits us all for the air that we breathe and for our travel times, no matter what mode we're using. So this is a creative step forward. We urge a yes vote, and thank you.
Thank you.
The last two are Sharon Nassett and Keel Johnson.
Good afternoon.
Kyle. It's Kyle, yeah, but it's spelled different. Yeah.
Looks like you're it.
Oh, well, hey.
It's got to be good then.
I'll give it a try, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Council members, thank you so much for being here and for having the citizens come and talk to you. They come here and talk to you because they believe in you and believe in the system and believe you want to help. The thing that is missing right now here in this conversation is this is a third wheel project stool. Legislative body, you guys. PDOT, which is a kind of executive, or if it were ODOT, kind of executive, and then the citizens. And projects, locally preferred alternatives, come from the citizens. You look at it and say, yeah, that's what we want, we'll put money into it, and then it's constructed by PDOT or ODOT or whatever. As you notice here today, everybody is coming forward individually, but there is no environmental justice group. The third leg of the stool, that is paid for. For a lot of years, as you might remember, Jerry Sunville Williams ran the environmental justice group until ODOT disfunded it during the CRC in 2005. And since then, citywide, we have not had an environmental justice group during.
We have OPO.
No, I'm paid. Well,
Let's let Sharon finish. Yeah, let's let her finish.
As a third wheel that we go to that's paid for, and as so TriMet said, they did their own outreach and they had to do their own environmental justice. And gee whiz, they knew exactly who to call up in the neighborhood who was in touch with everything. Okay, so it has to come out of the neighborhood and it has to come out of the community. And for a long time we did have, and yes, Opal, and I am in no way meaning to discourage their value because it's strong. Northwest Neighborhood Association, excellent. But that body is missing. They should be collating all these people together. But anyways, what was missing on the map is 24-hour service. That's why we have congestion on the road. We had that when I was in high school. And the ports and the industrial areas have no direct access to them. For any of the buses that go from the neighborhoods into those areas, circle them around and come out. And we have nothing that's secondary from where they're dropped off at the bus stop to their things, considering some of them are 2 or 3 blocks. So I have gone over, but that position, I would like it to see it refunded and
Thank you very
started.
much for your testimony.
Grazie.
Appreciate it. Okay, that wraps up our public testimony. We have a vote on a resolution and we have an emergency ordinance. Any further discussion on the resolution before we call the roll? Carla, call the roll on the resolution 144.
Fritz.
Well, I've been a dedicated transit rider for 61 years now, going on 62. 34 here in Portland, and 94, 12, and 44 are my most used bus rides. And I'm transit dependent during the winter, especially. So I'm thoroughly supportive of this. I think it's a really great project. Thank you, Commissioner Udaly and Jamie Duhamel on your staff, Chris Warner and April Bertelsen in particular, also Kristin Hall from Portland Bureau of Transportation, Doug Kelsey and our partners from TriMet who are here today, the many community-based organizations and members who provided testimony. Thanks to Carrie Waters and Irene Marion, who are doing really great work on equity in contracting and other aspects of the Portland Bureaus of Transportation's work. And thanks finally to Ms. Kwan on my staff, who helps me understand all of this. Aye.
Hardesty.
I want to take this opportunity to really thank Commissioner Udaly and the incredible staff at PBOT who've worked on this. It's always fascinating to see things move quick at the city of Portland, right? And so I just want to really appreciate the fact that there's a great vision. We know where we're headed. We know why we're doing it. And we just need our real partners at the regional level to actually really step up and help us make this vision a reality. And it is my understanding that, they have a regional approach, and TriMet has a vision that is region for the city of Portland. We're really focused on the people, and I applaud that we are focused on the people who are most transit dependent first, because it is still my belief that people who have options will always have options, and people with limited options will have limited options unless we do better as the governmental entities that are responsible for making that so. And so it is my hope that as we move forward with this project, that TriMet gets really specific about how they're going to go back and invest in the areas where those investments have been lacking, because it doesn't make sense to me to be building more when what we have in place is not adequate. And I would love to talk to TriMet's board the next time we're putting in new buses to figure out who gets the butt cheek leans and who gets the real bus stops. I vote aye.
Udaly.
You had to work that in, didn't you?
She's never going to let it go. Please, talk to her.
It is what it is.
Udaly.
I don't know what that means.
Well, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everyone who came today. I have a long list of other thank yous, but first I want to share a few brief reflections. Number one, I want to assure my colleagues and the public that with every project PBOT advances, we ask ourselves two questions. How does this project help us reach our climate goals? And how does this project help us reach our racial equity goals? And this project is a huge step forward for both. I'm really proud of you. They tell me that 1 year is is lightning speed and transportation. It feels like a long time to me. But I want to appreciate you. Jamie touched on this, and I can't say it enough. There is an ongoing Harvard study about upward mobility that shows commute time is the single strongest factor in the odds of escaping poverty. That's not something that we have ever talked about or addressed as long as I've been on city council. And since I learned it last year at Railvolution, it has just been playing over and over again in my head. We are caught in a vicious cycle where low-income people who are transit dependent, who are more likely to be from communities of color, are being forced out to the outer edges of our city with inadequate public transportation and greatly diminished access to jobs and education and other amenities that the rest of us get to enjoy. So I just want to promise you that individual is at the heart of these decisions, even if phase one, you're not seeing all those red lines out in East Portland. That is really who we are aiming to serve. It's just one solution. I do believe it's a huge step forward, and I absolutely know there is a lot of more work to do. As a disability advocate and someone who navigates the city with a kid on 4 wheels, I bring perhaps somewhat unique perspective to this conversation and some different vocabulary. I think a lot about universal design, which is usually something that we talk about in the context of physical ability, but I think about universal design in the context of policy and our transportation projects. Another really lovely term from the disability world is deviations, standard deviations from the norm. That's how children are evaluated for special education services. How many deviations from the norm? And I mentioned that. And the third thing is I know painfully well how hard it is to navigate a world that was not made for you through my experience with my son. This city was not made for cyclists, pedestrians, or bus riders. Unfortunately, it was made for automobile drivers, and we are now trying to correct that kind of over dedication of resources and space and priority to drivers. And I know it's painful and it's unpopular with some people, but it absolutely has to happen. When we address the needs of the extremes in our community, and in this case, I'm thinking of someone who's low income who lives in East Portland, the middle will take care of itself. If we get to the challenges and barriers that that person in East Portland is experiencing, everyone along that bus route, everyone along that income line, everyone who has slightly more privilege is going to benefit from what we delivered to that person. So that's another thing I think about a lot. Okay. Now for my thank yous. I want to thank a lot of people for making this happen and for making it happen so quickly. Just forget I said that thing earlier. First, thank you to PBOT staff who have worked many late nights and weekends, my apologies, this last year to keep on pace with our timeline. Huge thank you to April Bertelsen, who has been the lead staffer on the Rose Lane project. I also want to thank Art Pierce, Emma Sagor, Kristin Hall, Denver Rigarda, Mauricio Leclerc, Mel Krniech, Gina Gastaldi, Mike Saratella, Shane Valet, Zeph Wagner, and Paul Belton. I also want to thank our community partners for coming to the table over many months to help us stay focused on how this project can change people's lives. You heard from many of them, and you heard more asks from most of them as well, and we encourage them to do that. We want the criticism, we want the feedback, and we need you to bring pressure to bear on the council, on the Bureau, on TriMet to do as much as we can. Another huge thank you to Jess Thompson, Carrie Schlossauer, Sydney McCotter-Bicknell, Tristan Isaac, Richa Podell, Alan Kessler, Clint Culpepper, Darren Golden, Ashton Simpson, Kim Marks, Vivian Satterfield, Adi Leverett, Anna Kemper, and Andrew Riley. Also, thank you to our partners at TriMet for coming to the table and being willing to negotiate increased service. It's vital for us to continue to work as partners on these lines, with each side committing to pushing ourselves further than either of us think is possible. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues and their staff for their support, and my own staff for their hard work on this. Jamie Duhamel, my policy director and lead PBOT liaison, initiated this project with the Bureau, created and facilitated the internal advisory group, and has been my voice with the Bureau and the community on this item all along the way. And I want to add, while this may not have happened without me sitting in this seat, it definitely wouldn't have happened without Jamie. So while I get all the thanks and accolades and the roses, you need to direct some of them at her. Thank you to the rest of my staff for your behind-the-scenes support that's pushed this initiative over the finish line. Please join us for a reception in the lobby and selfie opportunity with the cardboard cutout of a TriMet bus. Very proud of what we're doing here together today, and I enthusiastically vote aye.
Wheeler.
Well, thank you. First of all, Commissioner Daly, thank you for this. I've said this in private, and I'll say it in public. I may have said this in public before, but when I assigned you the Transportation Bureau, frankly, neither of us really had a very deep understanding of either what I was handing to you or what you were accepting.
I begged him not to.
And my experience has been that you have done an exceptional job as our Transportation Commissioner, and you have an exceptional team at PBOT. And when we first discussed the Rose Lane project, I think it was months and months ago, I was enthusiastically supportive then, and I think you sort of looked at me and said, you do realize this is controversial, right? And I remember sort of laughing and going, this may be why I'm not a particularly gifted politician, because I see this
Same.
as not being particularly controversial. I see this as an absolutely essential movement in the right direction. And I just want to acknowledge some of the testimony we heard tonight. This is about systems. It's not just about a project. And it isn't even just about transportation. What we heard testimony on today, just taking some quick notes, we heard people talk about the critical nature of the Rose Lanes and a good transit system in terms of jobs. And we heard about shared economic prosperity. And we heard from people who said this was critical to their education and to the education of their children. We heard from people who said this is a critical component of families being able to experience the community fully and be able to spend more time together. We heard about equity repeatedly as being a hallmark of this project. And I want to thank you, Commissioner, and I want to thank your staff, Jamie. I want to thank the PBOT people, and I want to thank, frankly, all the advocates in the room. We heard from a lot of organizational leaders who are our partners in the community who also share this really great vision. Now I want to take two slight digressions. Digression number one, although I was born and raised in this city, I've also lived in cities like Boston and New York, where the transit systems are truly complete, they are reliable, and they are frequent. And Commissioner Fritz mentioned this about her experience in London, even though they're often on the wrong side of the roads for reasons that are inexplicable to the rest of us.
And the
But
buses are 2 stories.
that is actually fun.
That's so
yeah,
fun.
that is actually fun. But that's really a diversion here. But this has to be our vision for the future. And I thank our TriMet partners for being here today. Bernie, you come here frequently, and the incoming comes your way because we have a transit system like so many East Coast or West Coast transit systems that were built, as Commissioner Daly said, in the era of the automobile. And so it wasn't emphasized the same way it has been on the older East Coast cities, where they built that infrastructure and assumed people wouldn't have automobiles, but they assumed people would in fact all share public transit in a meaningful way. And so we have to take the steps, whatever they be, to create this system because we know we're not going to create any more roads, not in the central city. It ain't going to happen. There's nowhere for it to go. So we have to be more thoughtful about how to build a transit system that works and achieves all these goals around economic prosperity, jobs, education, family, equity. All of these things are an integral part to the community, and this is a great first step. So I just want to say kudos to everyone involved in this. I'm very, very enthusiastically supportive. I vote aye. Resolution's adopted. To the ordinance, please call the roll.
Fritz?
I really like it when we have two things to vote on, especially when I'm the first person to vote, because as each of my colleagues talks, I think, oh, I should have said this. Should have. So I will be going to England on Monday to celebrate my mother's 90th birthday in Leeds. Thank you. Leeds, which is about the same size as Portland. Once you turn 65, you can ride off-peak for free. So that was mentioned, that the buses are busy, so it works for me because it means my mother doesn't get me out at the crack of dawn to go do things. So that's one suggestion I have. In London, when you get to be 60, whether you're working on, you get to ride the whole transit system for free at any time. So I think there are multiple things that we could do to reward people. And first of all, and TriMet, aren't you just excited about how excited people are about transit? I mean, this is a great city that we live in where we are all looking at the multiple benefits of transit. Just one other thing I wanted to mention, that I brought up the issue of transportation network companies, and I'm hoping that these lanes will be for buses, including shuttle buses of institutions. Somebody testified about bikes and allowing bikes to use them, and I know that Commissioner Udaly is talking about that. When I raised this with my staff, the cyclists all said, we're terrified of buses. And I said, when I'm on a bus ride, when I'm riding a bus, I'm terrified of the cyclists, and they do slow down. Because the drivers are expert, but they have to slow down to let the cyclists go past. So I just wanted to mention that as you continue to figure out how this is going to work, that I hope that we have safe facilities safe dedicated facilities where bikes can have the right of way, and safe dedicated facilities where buses can have the right of way. I'm happy to vote for the ordinance. Aye.
Hardesty?
I think one of the things that I will be looking for is to ensure that as we contract for these services, I'm really appreciative that we're actually not going with the lowest bidder, that we're being thoughtful about having someone who will work with us throughout the process. But as always, I want to make sure that we are intentional about who we contract with, how we're helping minority and small women-owned businesses actually grow into medium-sized businesses. And today, for me, the scariest thing is actually walking in the city, especially if it's after dark, especially if it's raining, because no matter how bright my clothing is, it appears that automobiles don't think they need to or should stop for pedestrians. So clearly, as a community, we've got a lot more work that we have to do. And I look forward to working with you all to make sure that we continue to improve our public transit system. I vote aye.
Udaly?
Well, thank you, colleagues, for supporting this ordinance. It will definitely allow us to reach our MWDSB goals. Hate that acronym, but it's too long to say. I also forgot to mention something. I recently moved to the Kearns neighborhood because I realized the single biggest improvement I could make in my own life was decreasing my commute and leaving my car behind. My car is a wheelchair van for my son, so it lives with him because we don't have reliable enough public transportation for him. But my bus lines are 12, 19, and 20. It's a just embarrassment of riches. And I've really been enjoying taking the bus to and from work. And to be honest, I haven't been paying. I haven't looked to see if any of these will be Rose lanes. The 12. Okay, thank you. That's the Sandy, right? Okay, yeah. So maybe I'll be taking the Sandy more often. Anyhow, And I recognize that that is a privilege for me to get to move into the Central East Side. I feel because I live in a transit-rich neighborhood, I have an obligation to take transit. And I just want to encourage everyone else to hop on the bus more often if that is a viable option for you. And we hope to make it more viable, and I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Happy to support it. I vote aye. Ordinance is adopted, and we are adjourned.
Well done.